A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts. A person so he loses touch with reality and lives in a world of illusions. By thoughts, I mean specifically chatter in the skull, perpetual and compulsive repetition of words, of reckoning and calculating. I'm not saying that thinking is bad. Like everything else, it's useful in moderation. A good servant, but a bad master. And all so-called civilized peoples have increasingly become crazy and self-destructive because through excessive thinking they have lost touch with reality. That's to say, we confuse science with the real world.
This is the beginning of meditation.
Most of us would have rather money than tangible wealth, and a great occasion is somehow spoiled for us unless photographed. Most of us, and to read about it the next day in the newspaper is oddly more fun for us than the original event. This is a disaster, for as a result of confusing the real world of nature with mere science, we are destroying nature. We are so tied up in our minds that we've lost our senses. Time to wake up. What is reality? Obviously, no one can say because it isn't words. It isn't material, that's just an idea. Reality is
The point cannot be explained in words. trying to put you down. It's an expression of you as you are. One must live. We need to survive, to go on. We must go on.
What's up, everybody? Brother KDG here this evening. Let's make sure I didn't get rugged before I start rambling away. YouTube likes to, well, I guess it's not even YouTube. I guess it's the world we live in now that's so money driven, money based, money biased that you can't even play an artist's song anymore on your stream without the fear of YouTube cutting you down. What a world we live in. Let's make sure I'm still here. If at any point in time I cut out, please just start dropping comments because the comments still come through, but YouTube cuts the video. So I'm surprised. I am surprised that I didn't get rugged for that one. Every time I try to play music, I get rugged. So I started to have to go down the royalty free path. But anyways, I'm coming to you tonight as Brother KDG. I usually come as KG talking about internet money. I've been spreading internet money alpha all day long. I jumped on Crypto Coffee stream today, which was an honor. I jumped on with the Magic Carpet Ride boys. That was an honor. And if you came for in-depth conversation about the tokenomics around internet money or anything like that, that's not the nature of this stream here. The nature of this stream here is I felt the need, not the need, rather I was compelled to share some thoughts. So there's not anything in particular. There's no agenda. It's just I was having some thoughts, and this YouTube thing is my medium to share those thoughts. And so apologies for the video quality. I know it's bad. I see the warning up here about bad quality. I live on the outskirts of society. So no blessing is curse free. No curse is blessing free. So being that I get extra privacy, being surrounded by a serene environment, I give up amazing quality internet for that. And that's the trade-off I'm willing to make. I know the infrastructure will eventually make it out here, but land is an amazing asset, not just in terms of financial appreciation, but they're not making more of it. You get the land that you have, and that's what you have. So let me go into chat real quick and say what's up to everybody who made it out to the Midnight Ramblings. Love Rich, what's up? Samuel, how's it going? Hex Pimp, Alsamac, Crypto Luck Box, Corey the Light, Scarlet Rose, OG Crypto, Crypto into Hood, Yellow Cake, Tranny Transhumanist. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you like that song, by the way. I don't know how the songs come through, but that was a track called Overthinker by an artist, Enzo. And the man you heard talking in there was a man named Alan Watts. He's an interesting character. He's actually served as one of my greatest mentors in life. I've never met him. He's been dead my entire life. So, but his words, his message has always been there for me because of this amazing piece of technology that we have that allows us to go into this ether, this library of human consciousness where thoughts, opinions, ideas, facts, all these things come together. And by just clacking my keys over here, I can search the human psyche. And Alan Watts, he's an incredible human being. As a human being, he did some questionable things. And I'm like, well, bro, I probably wouldn't have done what you did. But hey, he still has lessons to teach. We all do. And no one's perfect. Po Buddy's perfect. And going into another just I'm gonna say so many just one-liners tonight. Napoleon Hill said, Every disadvantage plants the seed of an equivalent advantage. So if somebody is being the opposite of a role model, they're still being a role model by nature of showing you what not to do. So every single human being you interact with out there is a role model in some way, shape, or form. Every human being has a nugget of wisdom, of gold to give you, even if you don't interact with them. Seeing how people live, seeing how people don't live, the things people say, the things people don't say, you can learn something every moment from somebody. And I believe the way that you can do that is by training yourself in the art of awareness. And everyone's capable of it. This isn't any one superpower that one human being has the ability to achieve and another doesn't. No, we are all capable of awareness, and we're all born with a different degree of awareness. Some people's awareness is greater than others, but that doesn't mean that just because you have a little bit of a head start doesn't mean that you can't become that aware. And by leveling up this awareness muscle, it allows you to see things that other people may not see, or things that you didn't see before. It's what I believe the creators of the Matrix were trying to convey, right? We can look at the Matrix as this simulation, and maybe we do live in a simulation. I'm not sure. But even if we did, I don't believe that that was the ultimate message of the Matrix. I believe that the Matrix was attempting to convey the idea, and the Matrix isn't the only one. Religions, philosophies, other movies, songs, it's all over the place. But in the Matrix specifically, they were attempting to show the degree of awareness and what you could accomplish and what you could achieve by having different states of awareness. Look at what Neo did when he was aware that he was capable of doing those things. But it was a combination of awareness and then belief. So we're going to go off on down rabbit holes. That's what I'm here for tonight. I came in as BrotherKDG. And the reason that name even spawned is there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is I don't ever want to be a king. Not even saying I am. I'm just saying I don't ever want to be a king or like some entity that is revered or looked up to. I want to be an equal. I want to be a brother. I want to extend my hand. A little brother, a big brother. I am in my own life a little brother and a big brother. And in both realities, I teach and I learn. But the brother, the sibling, is like the most special relationship that exists in the world. Well, okay, not the most. There are many different types of special relationships, but the brother and sister relationship is one that is unique in that you're like best friends with a different level of trust that doesn't exist outside of that. So I want to be a brother. That's what I want to be. I want to be everybody's brother. Big brother, little brother, I don't care. I feel like a brother. So crypto in the hood. I'm a god, and so are you, KG. I agree with that statement. So is everybody reading that message? KG, check your TGDMs real quick. An aquatic animal wants to join. Oh, yes. Oh, amazing. Amazing. Hold on. I've got a special treat. I've got a special treat. Hold on, everybody. Hold on. See, you put it out there. You put it out there and you receive it. People want to say the law of attraction doesn't exist. Well, if you believe that, then you're probably, I don't know, you may still be wrong, because I felt compelled to just talk tonight. And maybe no one was going to listen. I have 18 wonderful people in here right now. Thank you for joining. But here it is. This wonderful human being, someone I love very much, just hit me up. Let's get him in here. Let's get him in here. I love this reality. Another thing I wanted to say is going back to internet money, because this thought actually spawned today from this. I think about this all the time, but this whole reason I wanted to come and talk today. I see a lot of people out there wanting to accomplish things, wanting to live out a dream, or don't even really know what the full vision of the dream is yet, but they want to do something greater than the thing they're doing in this moment. And what I want everybody to know about yourself, you can debate me. It's fine. You're wrong. I love you, but you're wrong. You can do anything you set your mind to. If you see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. And if you have a will to accomplish it, you will accomplish it. And WaLLrus. What's up?
What's up, brother?
Nothing much, man. I see you got the tiger eye beads on.
Always got to stay safe.
I got the black Labradorite on tonight.
Very nice, very nice.
How are you, man?
It's been a minute. Doing good. I saw that message in Telegram. I was like, man, I haven't jumped on in a minute. I had to come holler at my boy.
Yeah, man, it's good to see you.
Yeah, you as well, man.
I'm literally just flowing, just talking. So if there's anything you want to add or anything you're inspired to say, by all means, floor is yours. Stage is set.
Man, no, I was just picking up what you were putting down. I've been really taken back by a lot of the gratitude here recently. It's been really, a lot of people have seen it, but with the community, there's been a lot of really just, there's that same level of sort of negativity that we always feel, but there's been a lot of people underneath that have been like really, really grateful. I had a couple of people reach out recently, WaLLrus with 2Ls.e and WaLLrus with 2Ls.crypto. They got purchased for me by the community, man. They sent me the ENS.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and like so I bring this up a lot. Like they both reached out and said some positive stuff. One of them, I've never even spoken to this guy. He just follows, like, kind of got into the content and those things and just reached out. And that's what made it powerful to me. As grown men, like, we're really great at gratitude in a lot of ways. Like maybe the people that we're closest to who do the most for us. But to just reach out, go out of your way on a day and just be like, man, I really appreciate what that guy's doing, some time and effort to do that. That stuff's powerful. Like attention is extremely powerful. So for someone to go out of their way and do that, I thought that was really, really cool on that, with that manifesting side. So especially with me talking less hex pulse chain specific stuff, I've been trying to, broaden that out for the whole team. Like you guys know, that's some of the stuff I brought up when I jumped on with LL, that like it's almost a business development role for everybody. Like we got to have a big name, we got to be outside of the silo and do these things. So I've gotten almost no flack from the community, and everyone seems grateful when I tell them, like, yes, I'm speaking more general stuff. I'm speaking to a broader audience. I'm not only do we need that, but also, man, everybody's so damn smart. Everybody's doing such a good job that, like, they don't need me to sit in the Telegram room. Like, they don't need me to, I mean, I'll hop on Twitter Space because I like talking to everybody, but mostly, to be honest, it's mostly just selfishly because I enjoy hanging out and talking to the team. Like they don't need me for that stuff anymore. And so it's just been cool to kind of see this thing grow back and forth and how the community on it. And yeah, I've been very grateful myself, man. A lot of people have a hard time trying to step up or step out or do cool stuff. And man, I really haven't caught much flack, man. Everybody is really, maybe they just feel the genuine nature and that it really is the end goal. But I've been really grateful, man. And I've been very pleasantly surprised at the gratitude from the community, man. So it's really cool stuff. So you just on vibing, man. I was vibing, so I felt like it, had a good time with the holiday. So I wanted to jump on, man. I'm excited.
Well, I'm glad you're vibing. Yeah. And to your point, dude, you've put so much out to the community and to the world. To me, it's not surprising that you're getting it back because for example, when I first came into this particular community, one of the first people that ever made an impression on me was you. You helped me elevate my intelligence in terms of crypto. Like, I, part of KG's crypto molding is WaLLrus. And so it makes total sense to me that people are taking care of you and looking out for you because it brings me back to this philosophy. We talk about go-getters, be a go-getter. And sure, that applies. But I read this book and it introduced me to this philosophy called the go-giver. And it's like the more you give, the more people want to give back to you. Like there's this Native American tribe. I don't remember the name of it. So I'm sorry if this is your tribe and I forgot the name. But the way that their chief operates is he has nothing. He has no worldly possessions. Maybe it's just a story. I don't even know, but I like it. No worldly possessions. Doesn't buy food, does nothing. He's just the sage. And yet he has a house, he has a car, he eats every day. He doesn't suffer at all. Why? People take care of him because he gives something. He fulfills his place. And so I think this philosophy of giving, giving, giving is you can give too much. You can give outside your boundaries, make no mistake. But as long as you're giving within your integrity and within your boundaries, people are going to give back.
Yeah, it's been a journey, man. There's just so many cool people in the community, man. So much cool stuff in the space. I just always resonated, man. It's been last couple of years. Like this is really all I've done is basically just crypto, and I don't mean all I've done professionally. Like most of the relationships outside of sort of the core social group that I had for a long time, it's only really grown because of crypto. Like this is where like I found so many like-minded people. I know you're the self is similar. I've heard you speak about it many times, publicly and privately. That the way from this is really powerful to have a tight-knit group here that you see growing and building these things. Like we've talked about for a long time, man. Like these people are accessible. Like in a few years when these things launch, we won't have the same level of like interconnectability that we have now, and where so many of these projects and cool things being built and personalities came out of like a pretty small little community. Like it's almost like a crypto version of the PayPal mafia. Like they all start at one PayPal and then explode and there's all this stuff going on. It's like, you look at a few of the Telegram rooms and obviously like Pulse Main and some of that kind of stuff. Like, and there wasn't that many people, and there's a lot that has come out of those groups and spending time together and wanting to build stuff for their own and build into the ecosystem and have a lot of similar views. That comes out of a really small group of people, really small. All these guys are killing me too. Tusk of Terror, that's so live. I wish WaLLrus would have been what I went under when I boxed, because Tusk of Terror, that sounds terrifying. That's so legit.
Hey, I'll sponsor your shorts, bro.
Let's do it. I was actually always so petty. I never liked nicknames, so I never had a nickname when I did that.
Hey, man, it's okay to have an ego sometimes.
I'm gonna give a name.
You boxed under your. I got you. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. You didn't go by the WaLLrus, huh?
There wasn't WaLLrus's then. It's been years since I really did it. That name I picked up, I kept really under wraps for a while. It's actually funny. This makes it sound like infinitely more interesting than it was, but it was actually from a few different political groups that I wanted to be involved in, that I liked that separation of like name and interest. So it started with some like right-wing ideals and then some libertarian, some like anarcho-capitalism kind of stuff. But I actually used WaLLrus as a way of sort of separating myself from those ideas. And that was where I started. And that was probably 2016, 2017, probably.
Tell me about it. Go into that a little more. What do you mean?
So there's a few things that kind of jaded me in a lot of ways, like looking at like friends and social groups, is that around that time, so I would have been, it started a few years before that. So let's see, I'm 34. That would have been about 28. So like 25, 26, give or take, where you're in whatever kind of social circumstances you're in. And as everybody kind of finds it in different ways, right? Sometimes they find a level of, I don't want to say enlightenment, but whatever you want to say, like a closer spiritual connection or like less
Awareness.
consumerism type values. Yeah, awareness is a good one, right? So like, you could just play sports and realize, man, like the team is actually more important than me. Like those types of things. You can get it from all different kinds of places. Well, what I found in general is that even no matter how much more positive some of the commonality, for the most part, it's still people just in costumes, just doing their thing, right? Like you found this around like the psychedelic movement when when a lot of people first have that experience, they're like, oh my goodness, this is it, right? And you think that everybody kind of on that wave is similar, and you realize for a lot of people, it's just a place to hang out, a different styling to dress, and those kind of things. It's not necessarily the movement you think it is. There is a movement that is that thing, right? But that a lot of the people surrounding it, it's just another place to kind of get in where they fit in. And so that was when I hit a real exploratory stage there for a couple of years where I was a little jaded from some of those groups as you try to find awareness, just different levels, as you kind of just grow as a human, you want to find those things. I got to be where I was like, man, I don't really want to be connected in that same way. So that's when I actually started that name. And it's always stuck with me. I just like the WaLLrus name. And even now, like, I'm not especially that like private, right? Like if somebody really cared, they could probably figure out my like real name and go through those stuff. I'm not that set. Like my face is here. I talk about where I'm at. The separation really for me is the convenience factor of like, I don't know, somebody finds out something from either side they don't like, and somehow it ruins the value I put out somewhere else, right? Like, I don't want to have a discussion about something else, and then somehow they don't want to listen to any of the value I can put into crypto because, I don't know, they don't like how I voted for something or another. So I've always thought that separation was, for me personally, it's not so much about privacy. It is like convenience and separation of those ideas and not allowing one thing to like overly affect the other. But I like the WaLLrus name.
I hear what you're saying completely, and I that applies to me for KG. It's just my initials, but like I've always felt weird about my name. And then when I got into crypto and I started going by like BrotherKDG and it's KG, I don't know. Now, like if I order food, I say, hey, it's KG. That's just like the name that I go by now because it feels good. And I can't really, for me personally, I can't explain it beyond that. But names are powerful. Because they represent ideals. They represent things. And so if the WaLLrus for all these reasons feels good, I totally understand. And I love that you're rocking that. And I hear you also, when you get into this, like, oh, if I express one opinion here, then people are going to just hate anything else that I have to say because they can't look past this one disagreement that they might have with me. And at the same time, it's like the philosophy that I hold with that is you're never going to please all the people all the time. The very best, you're going to please some of the people some of the time. And so whenever I get that anxiety about like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. Oh man, this person hates me. It's like, you know what? Whatever. Kid Cudi says in one of his songs, I'm going to be up in a way because they're going to judge me anyway. So whatever.
Yeah. The social shame is an interesting one too. Like there's a lot of those pressures and different factors there that are interesting. And yeah, I think that for the most part, for me, if someone really cared, they could probably go through and figure it out. Again, I've dropped enough hints, talked about this and that. I post up on my gods on everything. It has his name. Again, you really cared, you could. But it's about the value, right? So like, I actually have some content that'll be dropping pretty soon. I'll shoot you a little sneak later. It's kind of neat.
Nice.
But one of the things that like I touched on there is sometimes the names you see here, they're similar to an altered state. Like you see this in a lot of different people who compete and use the flow state. They'll also use like an alter ego, right? So like Batman does things that Bruce Wayne can't do.
Exactly.
Right. There's fighters that do that the same way. Like when I box, and again, I'm kind of ruining it, but it's all good. It's just us hanging out, right? It's just us and the team. So one of the things is I'm very, like, I think most would agree, like I'm pretty composed. I stay generally level. You don't really, you can feel some of my energy and like my conviction, but I don't really like rage. How many people have ever heard me yell? Right, I'm a loud volume guy. But when I box, I look extremely arrogant. Like I fight very hands low, very antagonistic. I play a lot of like games with range, and so if you were just like looking to the shadow and you knew the sport well, like it would look like a very very like cocky fighter. You would take arrogance from those motions, and so like my pregame like ritual and like when I'm in that flow state, it is much more obnoxious than people would see me now, and how like you think that like a lot of times like people are very expressive in different art forms, right? So like angry people, you'll see that come out in their art, you'll see it come out in their music. You see the same thing with a lot of different fighters, especially when they correlate with like that alter ego. So I tend to be very very chippy. I did the same thing when I played football, but especially when boxing. But that alter ego, it's funny that it comes across in a sense of arrogance, but it's because it just takes unreal of optimism to have your hands down and play that game. Because again, like I'm very exposed. Like so we don't, I don't really fight with a high guard. So you have to do that like there's a lot of trust. You have to trust that your reaction, you have to trust that distance, you have to trust the knowledge on what you've seen, the pattern recognition. So it comes from a different place. And so to be like chin heavy and stick that out, play that distance game, there's a lot of different trusts. Whereas you can kind of grit, like we call it bite down on your mouthpiece or high guard. You can kind of grit through that. But like if you're going to fight that very flow line, Conor McGregor, similar in that regard, you got to trust you're going to get popped eventually, and that it's going to hurt. Or worse, it's not going to hurt, and someone else is going to tell you about it later on when they wake you back up. So so it takes a different disposition, right? That's not a composed place to be. Like that's a place where you have to have an extraordinary sense of confidence in your ability. But it's so funny is that's what it looks like. That's how it comes across. That's even sort of the energy that I around it. But it's really because I'm actually a nerd at boxing, like I am at everything else. I actually just really like this. Makes it a timing and intelligence game around the sport, right? So like I'm not trading bang. I'm not throwing one to get one. I'm very loose and I'm looking for angles. I'm seeing if I can read your eyes, get your brain confused. I'm gonna beat you with like steps and mechanics and try to overwhelm the game and make you box, make you play my game and drag you into a timing chess match thing. And that's really just the way I enjoy boxing. So like there's guys like Guillermo Rigondeaux, Vasily Lomachenko. They're brilliant tacticians in the sport, and those are the guys that I enjoy. But it's just one of those funny things that like I have that almost altered state when I box it that is much different than my general demeanor that people would see on the outside.
That's really cool to hear you say that and share that, because again, I know what you're talking about. And okay, so society would say that, hey, having multiple personalities is a disorder. And maybe for some people it is. But I think that to be an adaptable person, you have to have multiple personalities. Because like you said, you jump into the ring, you're a different guy. Sure, there's elements of the core of your being that are present, and it's all really different expressions of you, but still, it's like Funny Jim. What's up, Funny Jim? He actually just said, nice commentary about compartmentalization. That's kind of what it is. So, like you said, you go into the ring and you're like this different character almost. You're still you, but being in that moment, being in that environment, you channel a different part of you, just like Batman and Bruce Wayne. Just like, I don't know. A lot of people do that. When I would play soccer, I'm a relatively like recluse kind of guy. On the soccer field, I'm running up at people and going, because I want them to get off the ball. So like I'm a little more aggressive, and just because in that moment I have to be. So I hear you on that. I think that if you're out there and you're like, oh man, I have these different parts of me. Some days I'm this, and these certain situations I'm this. I don't take that as a negative thing. I think that we as people should embrace those different parts of ourselves and learn how to fan that flame and really encourage those different parts of ourselves to come out. When you start to repress things get weird and sad.
Yeah,
Find that
and
outlet.
most people have a lot of those different places they listen to those things, right? Like, one thing that's like funny for me is like really, really heavy music is really like not even aggressive to me. Like the stuff I listen to like in the gym, if I'm trying to be like really, really aggressive, it's really not the heaviest stuff. There's times I'm sitting there just like relaxing, like smiling, waving at people with I got headphones on, and I'm listening to like we always me and a buddy of mine who got me really into like really heavy music, like Job for a Cowboy, crazy stuff like that. So we always had that we were like there's metal, then there's like heavy metal, and then we had another one, and then we started calling it the orchestra because we thought it's what it sounded like music if orcs made it. So that was not orchestra, but orchestra. So that was our joke for the
Nice.
yeah,
I love
the
it.
real crazy stuff. Yeah. So yeah, you get into like, like Bring Me to the Horizon or any of those kind of cool guys too. I like a lot of the British influence stuff. But like most time I'm listening to that, I'm just like walking around like just like smiling, happy as can be. But it's just like full riot in both ears.
Yeah, I hear you on that too. I do. And it's like that one is maybe it's a balancing, right? Because you're chill here, you're crazy there, and it's like you got that yin and yang energy going on. Like sometimes when I'm really angry, one of my favorite types of music is it could either be matched. It's usually matched. Like I usually go dubstep, some heavy dubstep when I'm really just like, I want to just run. I don't know. So using music to channel that too. I hear that, but I also hear the
So
dichotomy.
you vibe with the tempo, right? You like it real upbeat when you're angry?
No, I like it. I like it like deep and wompy, like womp womp. Just like
oh, I got
just
you. Okay.
hard hitting. I'm just like, all right, you want to come at me? You want to go there? And it's like I don't fight anybody, but then I hype myself up. So it's like, let's go.
But I could if I wanted.
Yeah, I could. If you were here right now, I'd write you a strongly worded letter.
That's right. I'd hand it to you, not mailing it, handing it to you.
I won't even stamp it. I won't even waste the 50 cents.
Mm-mm. Yeah,
cool.
the music's interesting too. Like there's just like sad music to me usually actually makes me feel good. I actually kind of like it because I've had a little different take in that usually whenever like music is making other people sad, I always have this like a little bit of like an inverse reaction to it because like if you're sad you lost something, you're also telling me how much it mattered to you in the first place, or it wouldn't hurt that bad. So like I've always like found some like cool value in like I actually think that like breakup music is like really emo breakup music is always like really funny to me. I actually really listen to like a lot of that. Like there's a guy, if you want to listen to some just absolutely appallingly sad like singer songwriter stuff, like front porch step. I listen to that guy's stuff and the same thing. It's the saddest breakup music, and I'll just be bothered. I actually funny thing. Yeah, it's just one of those weird things with music.
Dude, I have a hard time with like sad music and sad movies because I am prone to get emotional. And so like full disclosure, like if I'm in the right, the wrong place and I get too deep into the feels, like I'm prone to go there. So I got to be ready to receive the sad,
Have you ever seen the movie that Matthew McConaughey?
Oh wait, you kind of cut out there.
What's
Ask one more time. What movie?
The Matthew McConaughey, Interstellar.
Oh yeah.
Man, so I have a group of friends who laid especially if you're someone who's a little empathetic, they laid the worst trap ever. So this was when I was in San Marcos. This is just a little south of Austin. We were out partying all night, having a good time, just vibing, doing the very, very San Marcos, Austin vibe right outside of Texas State. And it's like 2 a.m. I'm exhausted. I'm just about to go back. And they're like, hey, do you want to watch Interstellar? No, I've never seen it, whatever it is. They're like, oh, it's a Matthew McConaughey movie. And I'm thinking like Dazed and Confused, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. So I'm like, whatever. There was a couple of girls. So I'm figuring some kind of rom-com or like Dazed and Confused. And I was like, all right, cool. So Interstellar is like a 3-hour movie for one thing. And it's also one of the saddest things that has ever been documented in cinema.
So sad.
So I'm over here just exhausted at first. And the movie's so good. I'm getting dialed in. So now it's like 30 minutes in. And I'm like, okay, this is really good. Okay. And then it gets to that sad spot. It's late. luckily it's dark and the girls behind me. I'm over here just like, no, it's gravity and shit. No, I get it. Like, oh man, I'm locking it up best I can. Like, I'm unprepared. I'm not emotionally or physically strong enough to be handling this. Like, we've been out partying all night, and they set me up saying it's a Matthew McConaughey movie.
Oh,
This is why I have trust issues. I'll never forgive them for that, man.
You did this to me. You did this to me.
Yeah, he did this to me, man. Yeah, it's a great. Yeah, all these guys in chat. It's a great movie. I love it. But again, to be watching that exhausted after partying, there's all girls behind me. I'm all trying not to cry about this guy watching his kids give up on him through that scene. Oh, tough. Tough.
Dude, that movie, yeah, because he's like he gave it all up.
Together.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I hear you. Like I even cry during movies when I get inspired, when I feel that, like, it could be a cheesy movie, but it's like, oh, they won the game, and I'll like cry because it's like I'm just like I love getting inspired, like, and it's not even like, oh, it's so sad. It's just like, when you get that like flame of inspiration that fills up your body. You're a coach. I know you feel that inspiration, dude. Like when I coach soccer, bro, I would cry sometimes, or like I would at least get that feeling because it was just like, I am so inspired right now, So it's not even just, oh, boohoo, notebook kind of tears. It's like, and going down that weird path, because we're all sentimental now. It's like it's like I think guys in a lot of ways are like nervous to cry maybe, but homeboys, let me tell you, feels good. Kind of like crying. I'll be honest. I'll throw it out there. I like it.
The big thing when it comes to like that stuff there, like you just need to be emotionally resilient. Like that's all that really matters,
Hey, it's the Midnight Ramblings, Lego. It's the Midnight Ramblings. You came in for it. You did it to yourself.
Yep, you signed up for it. The mostly when it comes to males, they don't do a good job of separating that. It's not that you can't be emotional; it's that you have to be emotionally resilient, right? Like most of the girls I have the most respect for are very emotionally driven people. Like they're not emotional in the sense that they're like outwardly neurotic or that they can't like maintain composure, but they're very humble people. They have a lot of honor. Like the way they take care of their family, their relationship with their social group, like they're very emotional people, resilient. They're just able to reserve those things, make hard decisions, to respond quickly, bounce back fast to emotional traumas and difficult situations. So yeah, males absolutely do not need to hide or mask their emotions. You just need to be able to be resilient at the right time, right? Like one of those, I know you're big on quotes too, and I love my good quotes, man. One-liners.
Hit me.
Jordan Peterson is like one of the goals that males should aspire to be is the strongest man at their father's funeral.
Ooh.
Ooh. Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
And so I lost someone in the family here recently, but especially with the same thing with when I lost my mom a couple of years ago. There's like nothing is going to make you feel better about the loss in the moment, right? But what you can do is be sure everyone around you, and Jordan Peterson's term is you can take tragedy and make it hell by not being strong and by not being able to pick up the heavy things for people around you. So that's what I think of as like resilience. So like, in any of those times, like, there's plenty of time to be emotional. And like recently, again, I had a friend go through that, what he lost his father. And like one of the very first things is when he reached out to me, it's one like this, again, this takes a very specific relationship, but most people would think that you're going to respond with, oh, I hope you're doing like what we would think of, right? Just some empathy and support. And I know this person extremely well. It's one of my close friends. I was just like, hey man, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to give you some support. I'm just going to have to tell you what it is, man. Like you're about to have to sack up in a really big way. Like, I know you think that and there were just some specifics about like some of the medical stuff that was around, things he had to do with it, taking care of his family. I was like, these people are not going to take care of these things the way you want. Like it's not going to be fair. It's not going to be fun. I was like, man, you're going to have to lock that stuff up for a while. Like you can call me when you need me. You're going to have to be extremely irrationally strong right now for the people around you, or what's a really bad thing is about to be a really horrible thing. And so I really resonate with that stance. I've gotten a good taste of that in my life, but I think that that's a good example of where you don't have to be unemotional as a male. You just have to be emotionally resilient. Like, you want to be the strong one when someone needs you to be, right? So like, yeah, absolutely. You know, cry when the movie's sad. Like, you can cry when Rudy finally makes a tackle and all that kind of good stuff, you know, but like, you're just going to have to be able to be strong for those times in life when they need you the most. So I think it's about resiliency, not a lack of emotion for males.
Bro, you just articulated that beautifully. And actually, Jim Rat talks about this idea called mental fitness. And I really like the way he phrases that.
Nice.
And, you know, you're totally right, because there is that time where the man has to be stoic and just sort of let the waves wash over him, because you do have the children, and you do have, I hate to be freaking traditional about this speech, but you have the women and the children looking up to that, the rock. And historically, you know, we've seen, or at least men have been put in the position to be that. And so, you know, I have two small children, and they're looking at me like, "Hey dad, I want to eat." It's not like, "Oh, I can't find you food." It's like, "All right, guy, what we gonna do? What we gonna do out here? What we got?" And it's, if something hard happens, it's like, yes, that emotional resilience of, I guess I'm repeating myself, but basically it's just being the rock, being the
Mm-hmm.
thing, the guy, the person that everybody can look to, because we all need reassurance and validation. And so to be the person who's giving the reassurance and giving the validation, even though you're going through it yourself, that's like ultimate strength in a way.
It's those. I think there's a certain level of those life experiences that, like, once you have them, a lot of this, like, the like standard advice makes more and more sense, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that was one of those things. Like, when I read through like a lot of I really like a lot of Jordan's work there, but like, you know, even like Andrew Tate, people people like sometimes, like, he says outrageous stuff, but mostly it's just to get you to kind of listen in some ways, and almost to, like, to me, he's almost like a balancing act on the pendulum, trying to get it to swing back toward the center. So, like, again, like, you even there, you felt a little bit of like, oh, I got to say I'm traditionalist, and like, kind of like, give this caveat. And
Yep.
I think most people listening in this scenario where it's like, hey, midnight ramblings, we're hanging out, shooting the breeze. It's like, this is essentially almost like a fireside chat with whoever wants to show up and listen.
Yep.
It makes sense to give that caveat. But if we're trying to engage, like, with a big audience, like, you got to be able to punch through the noise. Like, they're not going to listen to balance takes, right? That's why everything is clickbait, all that type of stuff. So I
Hmm.
think that what we see is that you need certain types of personalities to, like, punch through the noise to get you to come listen to the other stuff, right? So, like, if Andrew Tate, you know, makes you throw a fit because you read some ridiculous thing he says, and then you end up catching something he says that's actually pretty intelligent, and then you end up being like, all right, well, hang on, maybe this isn't all that's you know, all this vibe isn't this negativity around him isn't fair, and you end up listening to some Alan Watts, Kevin Samuels, Jordan Peterson, you know, great male of your choice that you know, sort of resonates with you. Then, like, cool, then Tate did his job in the
Hmm.
ecosystem. And honestly, if you listen to a lot of his stuff outside of, like, when he's talking to a big crowd, he's a pretty brilliant guy.
I'll actually agree with you there. Look, I don't agree with everything he says, but haven't met the person that I do agree with everything they say. But Andrew Tate, just like actually, I don't know if you heard the very first thing I was talking about when I started this was, everybody has these golden nuggets of wisdom that you can get from them, either how they are or how they are not. And so, look, Andrew Tate has said some things where I'm like, all right, look, he's a rip dude. One thing he said, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but he said, replace all the snacks in your house with beef jerky. So
Beef
I've been eating more
jerky.
beef jerky. I don't know. So it's just like, you try things. Look, I don't agree with all of this stuff, but again, like you said, I have taken some nuggets of wisdom from him. And so, I believe everybody has those nuggets of wisdom to give. And in today's culture, we like to just attack and control, and we all want our insecurities or traumas or triggers to be tailored to, but we're always searching in this external world for people to pander to us. But in reality, we need to pander to ourself internally, so that when we do get hit with these triggered moments, trauma moments, whatever moments, we're, again, mental fitness internally, we're able to handle that and respond accordingly. So if somebody comes and they want to bully me, it's like I'm oil, their water. It glides right off because I, on the inside, know who I am, know my worth, know my strength, know I'm valid. It all comes from within, all of it.
And like Tate's an interesting one too, in that so again, like, I'm obviously into combat sports. I've been for a long time. Like, he's a multiple time kickboxing champion. Like, he was actually relatively sort of like underground famous in the space for a long time. And so it's been kind of an interesting one for me, like, not to like, like social credit, like, hey, I was in on him first kind of thing. But like
Your
a
was
lot of
cool.
like,
Before it was cool.
yeah, exactly. Like but it cracks me up that like no one ever heard about Tate. Like Tate's background stuff is really interesting. Like his dad is an elite chess player. I'm pretty sure he's the highest ranking black chess player of all time.
I think you're right.
If not, he's one of the highest. Like or he was at one point. So, and Tate has this sense of really polarizing energy that I think, if nothing else, even if you didn't like what he said, that you could take that he is not scared of being ostracized. And I think one of the things that he points to is that, at least in the Western world right now in the culture, we have this sense of like human right or like entitlement on things that you just really want to be standard that aren't. So, like women have the human right to like walk down the street at night and be safe. No, they don't. Nope, they just absolutely don't. I hope, pray that every woman is safe. That's not the same thing I'm saying. But that sense of like safety is not the standard. Like, that is not how the world exists. The world's extremely dangerous. Like, making people feel safe at the level that we sort of colloquially say the word safe is extremely difficult. And it's not a right, and it's not standard. It's actually hard as hell to make those things happen. So I understand the context they're saying those in, but sometimes when you see something really jarring that breaks up some of the connotations that uses with word, breaks up the connotations for the words we use, it can be really powerful. Again, that almost like an altered state with a different perspective, using different words. Like another one, like illegal. If you ask someone if something should be illegal, they'll tell you a lot of things should be illegal. If you say that men you don't know with guns should lock you in a cage from your loved ones, should that happen? They'll tell you no to a lot more things. Those are the same sentence. But that word phrasing changes everything to them. So sometimes that shift from things that you hear from, I mean, again, like, I don't even like most of the things that Tate says. I think Tate's a really interesting guy. I mean, I'd go have a coffee and smoke a cigar with the dude. Like, maybe, would I let him around Habibi? Maybe not. He's kind of an ass. But, again, I think he would be polite around me and her specifically because, again, the similar viewpoint. But sometimes those people can break through the noise in special ways and give you that different lens to view some things in the world through, where you don't have that same level of expectation. So I think those people that just challenge things, even if they're not even right, sometimes it's pretty valuable. Just the act of challenging can be valuable.
Completely agreed. So you got to have yin and yang. I mean, not even you got to have it, as in you have to try to have it. It just exists by nature of it. It's black and white. There's hot and cold. There's, that's a whole nother conversation. But there's always going to be opposition and position. And, to your point about safety and that whole idea, that lends itself to, yeah, and like you said, I want everybody to be safe. But it's like we're wild animals who have somehow mildly tamed nature and domesticated ourselves. And we're saying, nope, nature, human psyche, all of it, got to bend to my will. He's got to do it. Yeah, look, murder's illegal. That didn't stop Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, it doesn't stop people. Yeah, you can threaten people with jail or the death sentence or whatever, but you're just not going to stop the brutal existence of nature. Dude, you have volcanoes and tornadoes and floods and earthquakes. And yeah, you have flowers and bunnies too, but you don't have just bunnies. You had a Pompeii. What, the people at Pompeii, was that fair? Were they entitled to that? No, they were just there and they got freaking ghosted. It happens. You can't get away from it. And so we've just got to, and that's why like memento mori is such a beautiful idea, because memento mori, so carpe diem. this moment, I could die on stream right now. I have no idea. I could die the moment I close the stream. You have this moment right here, right now. And it's what you do with this moment, this moment, this moment, this moment, forever into eternity. And that's all you're given. It's all you're guaranteed.
Yeah, I think that's another one that kind of gets missing. I think you did a good job of like explaining there. Like when they say like all you have is the now, they don't mean this right now. They mean that you only actually exist in the now. Like you'll never actually see tomorrow, right? So it's that framing about what you're actually trying to engage with and do. And this gets into like, you know, again, if we want to like lightly touch on some of the crypto stuff, like being emotionally resilient and like sort of some of that understanding the now and those value propositions, like that's why some of the stuff makes sense, man. Like the people who are successful investors in general too usually aren't the smartest people. They usually get advice from the smartest people in a lot of ways on particulars, but usually they're just winners. Like they're just people who find a way to win. Like a lot of it comes from a mentality, right? And that emotional fortitude or resilience is a huge part of keeping these things strong, right? We talk about it all the time. Again, just look across. Like Carnegie has that phrase, like thank God I was too stupid to get in my own way. You hear? I mean, again, it's a very consistent theme. Like it's just people who are willing to just sort of enter things with boldness and don't over reflect on some of that negative connotations. Usually they just figure it out. They're just people who have a not even necessarily like an innate sense of competition. I think they're just people who try to find a way to win, who just don't really believe in excuses.
Yes, and you can over intellectualize things. You can sit back and think about it too long and too hard. And no matter what, and Alan Watts, you brought him up, he actually talked about this idea. You can sit there and intellectualize and come up with, you could study something for 10 years before you make a decision. But at the end of the day, you're still risking it for the biscuit, regardless of how many points of data you have. So it's like the person that's just literally, if you walk through the door or you take 10 years thinking about walking through the door, arguably the same outcome and the same probability of whatever you're afraid of exists. But the person that just does it, it seems like they get lucky more often. It's like, is it intuition that's guiding them? Is it luck? What is that force that allows, like, why is Paris Hilton rich, but the person that works hundreds of hours a week isn't, 100 hours a week isn't? Why? What's that force? What's that void right there? Or insert person here that was just lucky. Like you can't discount Lady Luck. She's out there.
Oh yeah. The other thing too, I think is kind of funny when it comes to like the luck side. So I actually found it's not Douglas Murray. Do you remember the author that did the bell curve? The one that got really all that radicalization around like race and IQ? Was it Douglas Murray or Charles?
I don't know.
Murray?
Charles Murray actually sounds more familiar.
Well, there's a couple. I think they're both famous. I just can't remember which name is which name. So he has like this whole curve around, like his race IQ stuff was kind of one of those. But I think one of the things that always kind of gets with me from some of those in luck is I think if you're a really competitive person, you actually wish that like luck wasn't nearly as big a proponent, or that there was more egalitarianism to the way talent in whatever shape it takes is sort of spread between the population. Because I don't want to win because I won the genetic lottery. I want to win because I'm better. Like there's that's one of those funny things too. Like most of the reasons that I don't cheat aren't out of like moral superiority or any of those things. I just don't want you to have an excuse. I just literally want to be, when it's over, I just want to be able to look the other guy's face like, oh man, I'm just better. I know
I'm
it
the
sounds
alpha
funny.
walrus.
Yep, that's what it is. I want to be able to pound my fin on my chest and have my what did Ebonics say? My tusk of terror. It's one of those funny things, man. It's interesting. It's interesting which components really factor into motivation. But yeah, like I have different reasons. Like it's sort of funny. Like I have an entirely different set of reasons, like why like I don't cheat on like Habibi or in relationships. Is very different than like why I don't cheat at like sports or life goals. They almost have nothing to do with each other to me. It's kind of a funny one.
We hear it. If you care to share.
Oh yeah. So So like the reason like I don't cheat in like personal matters, like, you know, sleeping with somebody else and those things, is part like I take a lot of pride in being a good partner. I think that that's something that's actually like very integrated with being like a strong, very competent male, as being a good partner, being able to be trusted in that mechanic.
Yep.
And then obviously all the stuff about just being, you know, very family centric and those. But like why I don't like cheat in like the professional world or in sports, it's that is one of the spots where it is almost out of a sense of just hyper competitiveness. So I actually use the phrase when we're like racing in cars. It's like, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So I have a bit of a fascination with deceit and like cheating. So in racing, like there's a very different, whereas like cheating in like crypto or financials, well, that's just theft and fraud, right? So there's almost like within reason. I know we could obviously talk about like how corrupt a lot of institutions are, but in general, from person to person in financials, cheating in any sense is sort of like a no-go. Like it's a zero tolerance policy. Like that's theft and lying and fraud. It's essentially like actually illegal. It's some context. Whereas in different sports, it's viewed very differently. I've always thought that was interesting, and I love people that play on my own like rules. So like when it comes to like most traditional sports, I love leaning on a rule book. I love finding an edge case or a neat way to take advantage of something. But but I would never like use that same type of like loophole mentality that I have in sports as a way to be like, well, I just kissed her. Like, you know what I mean? I would never apply that to the way to like another female relationship, or even like in mixed martial arts. I actually don't think on the rule book in mixed martial arts. To me, I view in that particular sport, the rules are basically set up as the least amount of things we can do to prevent like grievous injury to the human. So like there's small ways you can try to like lean on rules, and I actually don't like when people do it in mixed martial arts. I actually think that they should like the refs should actually try to interpret it like in the spirit of the rule. So it's actually funny. I actually really like that side of like just psychology when it comes to deceit and cheating and how it's viewed in certain contexts and how it's penalized or rationalized inside of games.
I hear you. I hear you, right? Because in different types of relationships or competitive scenarios or business scenarios, it does have it has different implications. Some of it is personal. Like one example there is I skateboard, and there's a game in skateboarding called Skate. It's like horse but with skate tricks, and horse basketball but with skate tricks. And so sometimes the other person can't see if you landed the trick, but if your toe or your heel touches the ground, it's technically you didn't land it. And so sometimes the other person won't see. And I know my toe touched. I'm like, nah, my toe touched. I could take it. I could take the trick and not get the letter. But it's like, no, then I would know, even if I won, I didn't really win. I toe touched. So I get exactly what you're saying. So part of it is personal. You want to win on your own merit, even if your own merit means you lose. At least I know I didn't cheat. And if that other guy cheated and won, well, he has to live with that, not me. So I get that. And on that
So
note,
is that your disposition? I know. Oh, go ahead and make the transition if you want.
no, go ahead and ask. I'd have to pause real quick. I really have to go to the bathroom. Ask your question.
Man, I just jumped up. I'm gonna have to sit here and take solo.
Yep. After the question.
Is that your disposition in general, or is that part of the way it's seen in skate? Like in skating, if someone like dragged toe and no one noticed, like people are gonna be like, oh, he cheated, but like are they gonna be upset with the guy, or are they just gonna try to like call it out and like make sure the other guy won the tournament? Like how does that culture see it?
Like if your toe touches and you're trying to get away with it, I'm gonna go full vulgar because it's midnight rambles. You're a bitch. Your toe touches, don't be a bitch. Your toe touched.
But that's the way it would happen in a tournament, right? Like if I was arguing, I was like, I didn't touch. They would be like personally sort of like coming after that person. They wouldn't see it as trying
if your
to win.
If your toe touches, it's a miss. Sometimes in certain scenarios, your opponent can agree to give you a redo, but you have to give them the opportunity to do that. If you don't, if you just try to sneak it, it's like, oh, come on, dude, really? Be upfront about it. My toe touched. And if it's like a crazy trick and the other person knows, it's like, all right, dude, that's a hard trick, whatever. 9 times out of 10, you're gonna be like, look, get a redo, re-trick, So it's like, just like be a good sport about it. But yeah, my toe touching, I'm admitting it. So
interesting.
Yep. I'll be right back. All you.
Nice. For sure. So if anyone has a question, like I said, I didn't really have any plans. I just saw that KG was jumping on, so I really just kind of came to antagonize him. I think freedom for all. If you're still here, I saw you kind of ask me a more technical question. If you want to say something in the chat, I can answer that now. Or if anyone else has anything interesting going on, I'm 110% not prepared. Like I cannot say how little. I pretty much just hopped on, hit the button. Can I push that up? Oh yeah, he's the host, so I can't post the comments up. But yeah, that is an interesting way that KG put it when it comes to skateboarding. Just don't be a bitch. It's funny. It's on the head. Nice. So Rizology asked, how do I come up with my screen name? So I actually really like Lewis Carroll. And so there's a poem inside of Alice in Wonderland called The Walrus and the Carpenter. And for some reason, the poem stuck with me because the walrus is the creative shiesty guy in the poem. So for some reason, WaLLrus always stuck. And I've always sort of liked the nicknames that people have or ways that people make things that aren't cool. So I've just always thought those are really like Gronkowski. Like that was never a cool name until this just like huge guy became an elite tight end and it became Gronk. And now Gronk's cool, right? So any of those things where someone makes something like not traditionally super alpha, when they find a way to make those things interesting, I always think that stuff's really cool. So WaLLrus was sort of like an underused animal that I just thought were kind of interesting and neat. And that the poem always stuck out to me. So like it's funny, it's before we were just talking about, I've always found deceit and cheating kind of interesting because I really like game theory kind of stuff. So how those things are always handled is always interesting. So like if you look at most game theory, if you're ever looking at any type of video or theory, they almost always sort of have to have a pretext of like that the participants are acting in their best interest and that they're being truthful. And it's because trust and deceit are so powerful that if they're not adequately sort of integrated in the game, they'll break things, right? Like we've seen this spiral out of control. So this was actually an interesting one with Trump that I thought when I very first heard some of the things Trump was saying, like when what was he elected 2016 on his way up. What I actually found interesting was that he was so inflammatory and so obnoxious that he was like breaking the game. Like there was like some semi sort of like understood level at which you could push things and say things about other politicians, and then they were all going to shake hands, right? Like you listen to like the Republican or Democratic convention, and they'll blast everybody, and then as soon as there's a win, it's oh no, such and such is a champion. He's a absolute pillar of the community. They like just completely flip, right? But Trump was scorched earth. I mean, it was just nothing but venom and fire right off the bat. Didn't pull any punches, and he broke it. Like that, I think that's part of the reason that there's been this huge, like now some of the things that politicians will say and just a quote that doesn't even get any attention is absurd. Like, oh, that person's a toady or they're a puppet for Putin. It's like, guys, that's treason. That's actually a crime punishable by death if what you're saying is true. Like, you know what I mean? But we just don't even acknowledge it. It's like not even a thought. It's like, oh, whatever. Maybe they're like with Putin. I mean, like we'll literally say this about like sitting senators or members of Congress without even a thought. And it's because that sort of internal game theory about what deceit and lying was supposed to mean and supposed to do and how it was penalized was completely broken when that guy came out throwing fire. They didn't even know how to respond. So I think that's one of the interesting things about what Trump has done in sort of the social discourse is he turned up the temperature so high on those things, they almost don't even make sense now. Like what I would have to say to KG to actually get a rise out of anybody else is absurd. Like what people can say about another politician or very established prominent person is absurd. I mean, it's the craziest stuff ever. Completely broke that. And now we see it everywhere when it comes to essentially journalism top to bottom. There's almost no penalty for lying. There's a penalty for being boring, but not for lying.
I didn't hear all of what you said, but that last part, you're absolutely right. There's Oh man, it's so corrupt at this moment in time. It's all headlines, and as long as it sells, that's all that matters. Hey, if someone sues me, fine. Well, we made enough money off this headline to pay for it anyways.
Well, since this is Midnight Rambling, I have no idea how to really quantify this thing and make it make sense. But since we're on the topic, there needs to be a word for something when it's past being good, but it's not perfect, because perfect actually gets really boring. And I don't really know how to describe this phenomenon, but at some point, once people have the answers, that these things stop being so enjoyable. So like with cars, right? So like if you look at like Model A's, Model T's, all these like ones up to like the 50s, maybe not the 50s. There's a lot of beautiful cars by then too, and really even earlier on. But essentially, like these things suck, right? They're just wagons with these things that like technically explode at a lot of revolutions in front of them, right? And then you get to this point of like the 60s, and you're like, wow, like these things are absolute like engineering sculpture masterpieces of creation. Like they're just beautiful, right? There's so many cars out there, no matter what yours you're into. There's just so much shape and beauty. And there's a kind of another spur in like the 90s, early 2000s, where you see like kind of like another like Renaissance phase of like a lot of really advanced things changed about their ability to look at like aerodynamics and these things, and it changes shapes, and you start to get into like the teardrops and all this stuff. And like there's these points where it's not the word perfection, but like perfection at the time. But like now that we have the answers, basically everything's shaped the same. Everything just looks like a Tesla now. Like we already know like how to really fit most of these things in. So there's not these like really beautiful asymmetrical kind of experiments anymore, because they're not really building them for small subsets. Like you can market to the whole world. So like now, instead of like all these like interesting flavors or variations that maybe they're not even as good, but they're still really, really engaging and cool, so everything's just vanilla. Like, and you see that with like so many things along the way, where there's like a peak of when stuff is like peak cool, but they're not perfect. But then when they get perfect, they're just nowhere near as cool. Like you already have all the answers. I don't even know what you want to call that. Like there's a lot of these things. I feel like no matter what it is that everybody's into, there's like a point where it was really good and you were the most engaged, and it weirdly got better, but it's just not as fun anymore. And I don't know what that is. And I think that's one of those things that's happened recently. Is there was like this time where some of the discourse got to be less structured, and you could shoot some flames at people, and it was really engaging. It was like, I cannot believe that guy just said that. But like now it's just like flamethrower, exploding fireball chaos. You're just like walking through it like that dog. Oh, this is fine. Just drinking tea. You can't even acknowledge it anymore. Like the heat is turned up so much.
That phenomena you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about. And first of all, I love that like we keep using that precursor. It's Midnight Ramblings, because it's like we're just like giving it as an excuse to say things we wouldn't normally say. I love it. But because it's Midnight Ramblings, that phenomena you're talking about, one example I saw that very closely in my life was with Yu-Gi-Oh! If you ever played Yu-Gi-Oh! But in the beginning, so cool. So cool. Like almost barbaric in a way to what it is now. But now it's like, so my brother and I, we were Yu-Gi-Oh! Players growing up, and then we took many years off. And so we like get back into it, we're like, we get a little more nerdy about it. We start rebuilding our decks and like getting better. So we actually work up the courage to go to this Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament. And we got cleared. I mean, we just got destroyed in every which way. But the nature of the game now is, how can I beat somebody in one turn? Like what? The fun of the game is dueling. It's getting intense, like 100 turns in,
Right.
It's just like all that's gone now. It's just like, you lost. It's like, well, why are we doing this anymore? And you're right. It always gets to that point where it's like we've improved something so much that it's just like, you're right. It gets boring. Yes. Cool idea. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes.
I've used the word. It's another one that it's hard to sort of separate it because there's so much connotation. But I always think of it as like perversion, right? Like there's,
yes.
you know what I mean? Or
Yes,
like the difference
absolutely.
in like extremely like revealing or like beautiful artistic art in porn. Like it's one of those, again. It's what's that famous phrase? It's hard to define, but I know it when I see it.
Yes.
And like there's a lot of things like that, right? Like you just take something and you're like, hey, this is so awesome, and they're like, but this is better, and you're like, yeah, but now it kind of sucks. It's like I don't know. There's so many of those experiences, right? Where it's like a certain dose of it or at a certain level of expression, it's just so enjoyable and so fulfilling, right? On like multiple facets. And then somehow someone will, like, you could even say like a get better, right? And it just completely loses the sense of value. It's nowhere near as fun now. Maybe some of it's in the anticipation, but there's a lot of those things like that. I actually like there's certain tight time frames. I feel like everybody who's really into something will have eras or things that they
Yep.
enjoy more, right?
Yep.
Like there's the like football is kind of going through like a current one now where there's a lot of changing about the way they're playing defense, and it's really cool. It's really like schematically it's really engaging, but it's not quite as fun to me as when like you would have seen like the famous, like we would call it like cover 3, cover 1. It's like what you would have seen like the Seahawks run when they had that famous Legion of Boom defense, all those guys. That system is like a really fun way, and like they finally transitioned away to like a more different kind of standard in the way they do it. But like the Legion of Boom thing was just so fun. It led to a lot of like really aggressive run defenses. It brought out like star power in a lot of those schemes, and so the roles were really defined. So you get like sometimes you'll watch like a late 90s movie and it's like everything's a stereotype. It's the way they shot the movies in the 90s. It was kind of like that with like cover 1, cover 3 stuff, where because a lot of the players on the field were sort of pigeonholed into particular roles, you got these like very like almost like 90s stereotype exaggerated players. So like on that team, they had Richard Sherman, who's a very high IQ, plays a very specific style of like zone corner, and he's almost like the archetype for that style. And then they had a guy named Cam Bam Chancellor who played safety, and he wasn't that good of like general coverage and things like that, but he's an absolute enforcer. Like just an absolute, like he's that heavy hitting safety, that guy. If you're like, all right, what side of the field is he on? Because I'm going to the other side. And so you had all these like exaggerated characters. Like if you look at their defense that was really famous there, the Legion of Boom, it almost reads like a defense you'd get out of like a comic book. Like there's all these like glorified characters. They're like the smart, crafty corner, and there's the rangy midfielder who covers all the space. Like it just felt very exaggerated, almost like an anime in some ways. And now that they've moved it, they're better defenses. Like the players are more athletic, they're more blended, they're hybrid. But now they're just kind of good at everything. They just play like football players. There's almost like positionless in a lot of ways. Whereas when you watch those guys play, there's the bruiser safety, and then there's the big rangy guy who plays the field. Like again, they were very, very expressive, and like these personality types matched up with well with the positions they played. So it was one of those things that was a really interesting time frame. Like you see that also with like the running backs, right? Like everybody loves the old running backs who would carry it 30 times and be rough and tough. And like those guys just aren't as prevalent now because the game's changed. But everybody loves the Earl Campbells, Marshawn Lynch, those just like heavy, the Fridge, Jerome Bettis, like just all these guys that were like very, again, like what would you call, like what do they call that? Like superhuman, very like super physiological, like these exaggerated superhero type guys that played those roles because they were very specific. So it's funny how you can, again, the game's better now. It's better. The athletes are better. Like we miss some of those guys, right?
When perversion is the best word, I think, but I think perversion is a byproduct of humans wanting to be as efficient as possible. And I think the more efficient you get, you lose organic. And we see this with food. We see it with what you just said. It's like they want to be so good. They'll spend a year just shaving off 1 second to be 1 second or whatever it is. I don't know, whatever the stat is. And it's like, but I think about this too, like early football. You had guys that were just oil field guys, and they had like one thing. Dude, they were just out there. They were just out there smacking each other around. Now it's like, oh, we got to spend 10 minutes seeing if his finger was like past the 1 yard line. It's like,
right.
It's crazy because it's so efficient that it's lost the humanity. It's lost the organic. It's lost the art, the passion behind the thing. It's like it's went from human to machine, and all these things become machine and efficient and just cold and void of the heart and void of the soul. And I think when that occurs, we enter into perversion. It's like you perverted the initial ideal. We see it with religions. We see it with philosophies. We let everything a human being touches, we see it. It's like our curse that we put upon things.
It is too. That's interesting. You brought up the organic side. That's a good way of putting it. Like there's it loses again, whatever you want to call that heart and spirit side. Godfather said Derrick Henry. That's a perfect example. Like Derrick Henry is an absolute like throwback style of that running back. So like he doesn't catch the ball very well. He's actually, despite being huge, he's even not really a power back. That's what's kind of interesting about Derrick Henry. He's this exaggerated version of what you used to see. Like one, he's just massive. He runs very specifically. He really likes outside zone. He has stiff arms. He likes to take these angles. He's fast. But he's like, when you see him, like he's like, you're like, yep, I get why he's a running back. That makes sense. Like it was a pretty logical career choice for Derrick Henry. And so there's a bit of that, like that archetypes that we all like kind of run to. And it's, yeah, like I think another good one is like AI and some of the stuff we're seeing now with some of these things or even like derivatives and some of these things inside of financial markets, right? So I think for like to kind of like, get into where a lot of the people know us here. So like there's a lot of things I think are really interesting, and this isn't even meant to be like a call out. I actually think the guys at Hedron, I think Alex and them are like brilliant. So like when they did Hedron, I was like, man, this is really cool. The wrapped contract for Hex, I was like, man, this is really, really cool. I love that idea of the NFT. But then they got into like Icosa and Watsa and a few of their stuff, which I'm sure is great stuff. This isn't really meant to be in any way that sense. I just didn't really care anymore, like me personally on that side, because it got into like their ecosystem is really good. And again, I'm sure I'm speaking 100% out of ignorance, but it just got to the point of like, it kind of went away from this idea of like where it was in the beginning for me. And I was like, okay, great. Like they found a way to like encapsulate stakes, make these things tradable. And they did the same thing with like adding this essentially like an incentive token. It's kind of the way Hedron functions. And it's got some other functionality that's neat with some of their loan mechanics and a few different things. It's pretty cool actually. But then the ecosystem kind of got off on its own tangent. And again, I'm 100% sure that it's fantastic stuff and makes good sense. I was just like, it's cool. I'm just going to move on now. Like it just kind of went so far. And I think that's the same thing with like a lot of derivatives and some of the things that we see inside of financial markets, where if you're like, okay, like, it starts with like shares. All right, well, that guy's got a company. I want a piece of that. I can't build that company. I'm going to buy a part of the company. And everyone's like, yep, that makes sense. And then they're like, okay, well, we should be able to trade these shares, right? Like these things are fungible. That makes sense. It's a commodity like everything else. So we should be able to trade them. And you're like, yep, that makes sense. And then you spiral out to hundreds of millions of dollars of Ethernet cables running into a centralized exchange where the vast majority of these things are just AI battling algorithm battles. And you're like, okay, this isn't cool anymore. This isn't what I meant. This is perverted. This isn't fun. And like, I think that's another one of those examples where it's like you started one at a time with all these parts of, derivatives to even to be price neutral for different things, to not have to sell a certain, like there's all these things that are like really valuable. And the more literate you get, and this is myself, I'm going through my own financial journey and adding a lot of nuance to these things. And then at some point you go and you kind of like see the way like synthetic CDOs and some of these other derivatives are using. You're like, I don't know that this is a bad thing, but it sure doesn't feel like a good thing. Like you're like, man, this is pushed too far. It's too complicated. There's too many of these things that are being added on top. It just feels like we got really far away from the initial idea here. And I think so again, I think we see this type of version in a lot of ways where we start with so many functional sound ideas that are really useful. And humans, we push things too far. We make stuff weird.
We always push it too far. Always. And that's evident everywhere we look. Everything we do. It's always too far. I mean, look at the world around us. We have freaking trash islands in the ocean, and fish are somehow evolving to eat trash. Like, how did that happen? How did we go from 300 years ago, there wasn't even pollution, so now we have trash islands in the ocean? This is one example. Everything we do, we take it too far. Yes, I agree, man. It's cool to continue to get deeper and deeper and iterate and iterate and iterate, but it just gets to this point where it's so complex that it's like it's just maybe not relevant anymore. It's like, you're right. 3 people on this planet understand what you're doing right now. And not even just to the ecosystem you're talking about, just in general. And there is a place for that. And like there is a level of beauty to that, because it's like, these inner workings of a human mind manifesting into a real system. But I don't know. And there's probably no way around it, because just like runners, when one person sets the world record, now all of a sudden everybody's running that fast. Like, how did that happen? And then the next person, now that like that was like, oh my gosh, no one's ever running that fast. Now all of a sudden it's like you're not even a runner unless you're running that fast. And so it's like humans are okay. I'm like talking myself into like seeing the other side now, because it's evolution, but in terms of degrees, and it's gonna happen. But like, when does it stop? When is the Usain Bolt running the 100? Usain Bolt of 40:57? Is he running the 100-yard dash in like half a second? Like, how fast do these guys run now? Do we reach a threshold where we like die, implode? Like what is there some break point? Because it's like, okay, you had that guy that jumped from the atmosphere and for the Red Bull commercial. You see that guy?
Oh yeah.
Oh, dude. So he reaches critical speed. He can't go any faster. So it's like, is that like law of nature? Does that apply in everything? Like, are we like, and if it does, what is that point for us? And where does it up? Is it AI? Is that the destruction of us? I don't know. It's like, because eventually it's like we're gonna probably evolve ourselves into de-evolution, probably.
So I actually had like a really goofy theory that was 100% wrong, but I just found it was like an interesting kind of thought experiment on that de-evolution side. If you look at like Giza and the Great Pyramid, the newer they are, the worse they get. They actually got less capable at building pyramids, right? And I even thought about some of that is that there's I mean, again, it's a very, very nuanced subject, right? So if any of you guys are Egyptologists, please don't come after me in the DMs and butcher me for this. But there's a few things where I don't think we don't do like a disservice. Like, this is why, like, I always bring up like pros and cons. I like to have that balanced take on things. Some of it's just my natural disposition, but also I like to understand the pros and cons. Like, it's a very big part of my thought process, right? So like, I don't want to hear just the smiles and rainbows and gummy bears version. Like give me the details. Let me like work through some of the stuff. So like, there's very little like specific like written history for a lot of these things, and we see that as a downside, because again, we live in a world where like there's so much written information, it's passed so easily, and obviously there's a million pros to this, right? Like, the ability for like, if it wasn't for some of the technology we have very recently, like, we would have never even heard most of the men that we just spoke on, right? Or we would have only seen it in the written word and not got a chance to hear the iterations of their voice and their tenor and their tone, and so much is, let alone the video, obviously. But there's a reason that a lot of these cultures still did like just oral passing of history, right? Like, because they didn't want it spread it out. They didn't want it diluted. Like, there's a lot of like rules with like the Quran. If you misdo one, like, that's why the translations are written very specifically. If you miss one symbol, it's not a Quran. They won't even call it a Quran if there's a misprint. They have a different word, or they'll say like, this is an interpretation of the Quran by such and such. Like, they add all this to make it clear that the Quran is one thing, one very, very specific thing. If you deviate in any way, it's not a Quran anymore. Now, again, that inflexibility has obviously cons in a lot of situations, but it's allowed that document to persevere and be resilient throughout history because of that unflinching, unwavering decision to be like, if you miss an apostrophe, it's not a Quran now. Like, they had to hold that standard, or it would have broken down over time. You would have been able to make concessions or reasons why.
That, which actually makes sense, because you have to maintain that regularity, regularity in a sense. Like, we see that all the time in, especially religions and other philosophical groups. There's a governing body that regulates what is the thing and what is not the thing, which makes sense, right? Like, I guess it's really even in sports. Okay, if you're I'll start on some football league. Well, you're playing football, sure, but you're not playing NFL football. So, I could see that. I'm not exactly You know, yeah, and there's a place for that because in a world of always trying to evolve and be better than the last guy, to do something exactly the way the last guy did it, I think there's a beauty in that too. Preservation, not preservation, not perversion.
Yeah, those balancing that balancing stuff. Like that's some of the most interesting stuff to me. Like that's the stuff, and even in crypto that I find like so interesting. That's why like the stuff I bring up is always like so off the beaten path. In general, like I prefer to speak to people mostly not really even about the things I'm most interested in, but about what they're most interested in. Because I'm always interested in like the deeper side of things that like most people don't want to communicate, even with crypto, right? Like luckily we have such a vast community that there's a lot of us that do like to engage in it in a very, very like heavy sense. Most people don't really care that much. Like they like getting the inside info here and there. They like feeling that there's so many like members in the community that are like trusted to hand down some of that like very technical stuff in a way that's easily digestible. For the most part, you know, they like to operate on a different level. But I'm the same way with football. Like most of the time, I don't talk that much football with people because I'm really into it, right? So like, you know, I coach and do fantasy and all that kind of good stuff. So like most people don't want to communicate on those things on that type of level of obsession. But I actually found that like I just enjoy obsessive communication. Like I like finding the people who just love just absolute granular depth stuff. So I don't even care what we're talking about. Like we'll talk about whatever. I actually literally watched from 2019 or excuse me, from 2018 through 2021. I watched the Scrabble World Championships. Like that's how addicted I get to competition sometimes. I'm not joking. I full on have watched every game they played.
Wow.
I've never even played Scrabble as an adult. I don't even think it's that good a game. I just found it one time on YouTube and I was like, I absolutely have to see what the World Championship of Scrabble looks like. And then I was like, man, this is kind of fun. I watched the next 3 years.
You know what? Knowing your character, I know you're telling the truth.
Yep.
I love that about you.
100%.
There is something.
Man, they cracked me up too.
There is something to be said there too, like watching humans perform things at these high levels, whether it's Scrabble, skateboarding, football, UFC, even just speaking, seeing humans do things at such a high level is, you know, it's inspiring, but it's also like, I don't know, it's like surreal. And like we're attracted to that surrealism. Like I'm sure if you watch, curious in the Scrabble world, are they playing fast? Or are they like, yeah, I got all these, you know, like the chess players, you know, they go quick as hell.
What's actually funny, what makes them interesting is that they don't even if you pull them up, they don't even think about the game the way you think. So apparently the highest level of Scrabble players, no exaggeration, know like 94+% of the English language.
Oh my gosh.
It's some unbelievable stat. Like the top, I don't know where the cutoff would be, but that top tier of Scrabble players like legitimately know almost every single word in the language. And so I always love commentators too. I think commentators in sports always crack me up.
Oh, so, Scrabble commentators? I gotta hear this.
Oh, they're just like, oh yeah, and obviously, man, you're looking at the board here. He's got a couple of great players. He could go aggressively and hit the triple word. He may play more defensively and obviously play some crazy word. And you're like, what does that mean? And it's like, they're like, obviously that means a Hawaiian tribesman who defends himself only at night. And you're like,
yeah,
that's a word? What? And they're like, what an easy aggressive play. Like, I'm not, it's actually hysterical, man. It's really funny. But like, they'll be talking about like defensive plays and like chuckling, like you'll look at a setup and you'll be like, oh, I could play like cow or jumps with an S. And like these guys will be like writing down at least 10, 12, 15 massive word choices they write down. And they're actually looking at the board like aggressive and defensive plays. Like it does not even listen to them speak. If you didn't know what it was, you just really wouldn't get it.
Dude,
it's interesting.
That's incredible. And I believe it because, you know, we kind of started, to bring it back a little bit, we kind of started this as like, oh, humans get to this point of being so incredible that we pervert things. But then at the same time, it can also be so cool. Like the fact that like in their mind, it's, you know, that Zach Galifianakis gif where he's like calculating in The Hangover. It's like They're like literally doing that with words. Like you said, words we don't even know. Like just you see how thick the dictionary is. I mean, come on. I think I know a lot of words, but seeing that thing, do I know that many words? Probably not. And so human beings are incredible, man. Eh, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Hey, do you like him at all?
I've not read any of his works cover to cover. I'm really picky. This is one of those things that you probably wouldn't think innately. I'm very picky about classic works. I'm so judgmental. I think that like if you give people like the top 100 most like referred like book suggestions, I'll take the over, and then at least like 40 of them are just absolute trash.
Fair enough. I think you would like Ralph. Sometimes I'm like, he uses the English language in such a way that's like, sometimes I'm like, bro, what did you, it's like, I'll have to literally dissect what he was trying to say. And I'm probably not even getting it completely right because he throws artistic elements in there, but he's very analytical, very just, he's an incredible, there's a reason he's as famous as he is. But point being is he wrote an essay, like he writes a lot of essays. So, they're more like an hour long read. It's not like, hey, you got to commit to a novel, or you can listen to an audio book, 30 minutes or whatever. But anyways, he writes this essay called Circles. And in the essay, he talks about how everything in existence can be represented by a circle being drawn around a circle. Once you define something, it immediately sets the boundary for the next thing to encompass, and so on forever. So the moment something is attained, that immediately, like, even though 10 degrees beyond is already in existence because it's just everything is already there is nothing that isn't. It's already there. It's just like there's like these little keys, that degrees of awareness. Okay, now I know this is possible. So now what's one step beyond? Okay, now I know that's possible. What's one step beyond? And so this essay he writes, Circles, is absolutely like everything we're talking about right here. And yeah, highly recommend Circles by Emerson.
I'll check it out because the very as soon as you start talking, it reminds me of, like, the sacred geometry around like the circle of life and the tree of life, the circle orientations.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And man, if you have another minute, like just running down that path, because here, midnight rambles, right? Going down
Right.
down the rabbit hole. He also defines in that essay, not he defines, so he quotes this guy, St. Augustine. And I'm gonna drop the G word. Okay. I'm gonna drop it out there for everyone listening. Quoting, St. Augustine defined God as whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. And the reason I bring that up is because we talk about these degrees of encompassment, but yet the thing that created encompassment cannot be encompassed itself, because the moment you encompass it, whatever it is, you create a box, and a box implies that there's an outside of the box. And if there's an outside of the box, then you did not encompass it. So you can never encompass it, whatever, it, God, the all, whatever name you want to put on it. So he even goes into that. Like that's actually my favorite topic, is the topic of like, what is it we're doing here? Where do we come from? What is God? What does this really mean? And not looking at it in my personal perspective from any one lens, trying to like really, you know, identify what that is, if it's even possible to identify. And I think like all these things, okay, bringing it all back. We talk about these degrees of evolution, degrees of awareness. What does that build towards? What's ultimate awareness? What does that look like? Are we just like floating telepathic beings that don't even need to speak, and we just like feed on, like our skin feeds on the oxygen? I mean, like what is like where does it go? How far does it go? Lot said.
There's I love that stuff, man. That's one of those. There's I'm not gonna say it correctly. it's a German word, but it's like Umwelt, but it means the universe as experienced by whoever the subject matter is. And so when people say they're the center of the universe, they always have that like an egotistical sense from it. But I like the idea of some like I said, like different frameworks or lenses to look through. I do like the idea of thinking as if you're the center of the universe, because if you get too far beyond and you stop measuring locally, then you run into some of those paradoxical experiences, right? So like there's a box, outside of the box is now outside, right? So it's not fully encapsulating, but the box can be so large that I physically cannot present outside, right? So like I don't have to necessarily like measure the extremes of the universe to know that this carbon body is never going to get there. So I think there's some interest. While I like that sort of like paradoxical rationale, these like chicken egg at a very, very big level, I've always liked some of those ideas of almost the exact opposite of being like, nope, I'm just the center of the universe. I've got 5 senses. They only go out so far. And that there's that sense of measuring locally can give you an entirely different viewpoint on some of these things. Not from the egotistical or the ego-driven standpoint, but just using the idea of like, okay, I'm going to measure locally and see how these things change, because there's that it happens in almost everything, even in biology. There's a weirdness of the big and the small. So there's this like huge bell curve in the middle where there's just like Newtonian physics. If you get too small, everything breaks. You're getting into quarks and electron clouds and like things essentially teleport, but they were kind of in the middle, but we're not really sure where they are. We measured it and it's there, but it's not there. And you're like, man, I don't know what you guys are saying, man. Like, I'm not those kind of monkeys. And then you get it and you go so big and you get to like planetary, you get like these warp time when it comes around some of those extreme, like those extreme black holes where gravity is so strong. Again, going back to like Interstellar, you actually do have some, I don't even remember the term they use, but like diffraction of time where it doesn't measure linearly at that standpoint. So I think we see the same thing when we start to on some of the like the idea of like when it comes to like philosophy or spirituality, that there's also that weirdness of the big and the small.
Oh yeah.
And so like if you measure really locally, you have like an entirely different set of context than if you're like if you think it like in a universal scale. So I've also liked the idea of experimenting with like that local measurement.
And I love that you said that, because you are the center of the universe. And I don't take that as a statement of ego. Prove to yourself that I'm real. What experiment are you ever going to do to prove that I'm real? These comments are real. Anybody outside of you is real. The only way that you can do that is through your 5 senses. And you have to trust that those 5 senses are measuring tools for what is real. So to be grounded, you have to live in these 5 senses. I mean, look, I'm drinking. I have 3 different drinks in front of me. They're appeasing a different part of my sense. So we do have to like live in this grounded reality that's right here in front of us. But like you said, going so big or so small. This is why I love to talk to scientists, because they're like, hey, if it's not proven in science, then it's like, it's just not real. It's like all science ultimately tells us on one level, sure, it's what we do know. But on the other side of that coin, science tells us everything we do not know. And the moment we prove one layer bigger, there's always one layer bigger. In exactly the same way, the moment we prove one layer smaller, there's always one layer smaller. It's infinity in both ways. And it's like, this is when you introduce the bow and arrow theory. And yeah, it applies small as well. Imagine you can go as tiny as you need to or as big as you need to. You heard of the bow and arrow theory?
Fill me in.
My favorite one to go with scientists. I'm in outer space. I have a bow and an arrow. I shoot my bow and arrow. It hits something. I now travel to where the arrow hit. I get on top of that thing and I shoot my arrow again. Repeat the experiment. Flies out into space, hits something. I get on top of that object and I shoot it again. Flies into space, right? So you repeat forever. What are you going to hit? A wall? You hit a wall? Okay, if you hit the wall, what's on the other side of the wall? You in a box? Okay, what's on the other side of the box? Are we stuck in a box? Okay, maybe in my perspective, I'm stuck in a box. It's infinite. I don't care. Like Stephen Hawking devoted his life to trying to find out the theory of everything. He couldn't. He tried to put one mathematical equation. He literally tried to use science to define God. He just called it the theory of everything. You wanted to be all smart and scientific about it. And sure, it's like science, it's almost like taboo to say the word God, but we're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about the thing that everybody, like, not everybody maybe, but like people like want to know what that thing is, but nobody can define. It's what started the most wars, the most disagreements, the most love, the most everything. It's this thing beyond us. And at the end of the day, people call me crazy. It's fine. I think we're all a little crazy. I think science to a degree is just another religion. It's another philosophy, because it all goes back to, sure, science would tell me that if I smash this glass on my head, yeah, it hurts. It's hard. Science would tell me that. And yeah, it does. It does hurt. It is hard. But at the end of the day, that is hard to me in my subjective individual reality. Maybe you ever seen that big Russian dude that can like lift 1,000-pound log? If I smashed that glass on his head, maybe it wouldn't even hurt him. It's all subjective.
Yeah, I've even learned, like, I've learned a ton from like listening to like the new in-laws and everything, like talk about like Islam. And I mean, again, I think for most people who, like yourself, like you're more scholarly on this stuff than I am particularly. It's interesting how like most of these things are like very, very similar in the religious context. And then you hear whatever interesting, like, discussion you're on, and you'll be like, man, that's kind of weird. Who would? Oh wait, we do that too. And like, it's really funny how sometimes like you just get a take from them and you're like, oh, and you're like, your first reaction is like, wow, that's so odd, or sort of counterintuitive, and you're like, oh, never mind, we do that too. And so it's like,
Yes.
some of the, like, if you listen, like the Quran is very different than Hadith, where they've added books. And when you listen to like where the Hadith came from, I don't want to say too much. Again, like, it's something that people take very sensitively there,
Sure.
and I think they have every right to. But if you don't know anything about the religion and someone explained to you who the authors are of the Hadith, you might think that's a little ridiculous. And you're like, why would anyone do that? And then you read the origin story of like Mormonism, and you're like, oh, never mind, I get it. We just do that stuff.
Out of curiosity, if you don't mind sharing, who are the authors?
They're
Hidden elders?
They're like people who knew Muhammad. It's like,
Okay.
it's very
Okay.
written years and years and years later, similar to almost like the Council of Trent story, where there's like this sort of culmination of these ideas written after the fact, and where some of it is a big issue. And again, I'm sure there's people that are more knowledgeable in this, so if anyone can punch in some of the holes. But like, one of the interesting one is, like, most people have heard of like Sunni and Shia. There's an actual spot in the Quran, a quote that says, like, I'm going to butcher something along the line. There's no prefix to being Muslim. Like, you're not a Sunni or Shia, you're just Muslim. Like, there are no prefixes. There wasn't supposed to be sex. And so, again, there's, people that are more read on it, but that was one of the things that I found really interesting, is that the way they look at certain like contradictions in Hadith, they tend to ignore. And even like Sunni and Shia, like, most people identify that way. And again, I'll have the quote, it's obviously translated to me, so it could just be in translation, but it's pretty specifically saying like, hey, you're not supposed to have any prefix. There's not a need to be sex. Like, that's an idea of division. And so but we see that all the time. Like, that scene, when I heard it from them, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Cause we traditionally think of Islam as all one, not even an umbrella, but just like one path. It's very specific. Like, they have one holy book. They're all Muslim to us, but they're sects, right? And the same thing with like Christianity. There's so much more variety there that we're exposed to in the West, that it doesn't seem odd. And then, like, we actually look into some of the differences. Like, I don't want to say ridiculous in the sense that they don't make sense, but they're almost comical in the idea that like this would cause a separation in the ideals of there's one book, one interpretation of God, and this was what all it took to like separate these paths into different, entirely different sects of Christianity. So, but we're a little numb to that fact. But like, when I heard it in Islam, I was like, man, that seems so bizarre. So it was interesting to see those different sides of those things, looking between the religions.
You're absolutely right. It happens in all the religions because you have different people with different upbringings or different ways that they relate to reality, trying to identify what this means to them. And so, like, okay, one very distinct example in Christianity is you have the Garden of Eden, right? Most people, at least Westerners, know this story. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and they had eternal health, happiness, everything they wanted, minus the knowledge of good and evil, which means I interpret that. See, I interpret that as show me the authority on truth. I interpret that as they had no subjective opinion. So they were, in a way, they were children in a way. They just lived, were taken care of. Well, one thing also that you don't really hear about in Christianity is in the Garden of Eden, you had not only the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you had the tree of life, guarded by a cherubim, which is like a winged lion with a flaming sword. So because they ate from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, God, in the story, restricted them from the tree of life, because then they would have had the knowledge and they would have had immortality, which means they would have been God itself, at least this version of God. This isn't even conspiracy. This is in the Bible. Read Genesis. It's right there. If you don't believe me, hey, not you, but just whoever's listening. Now, so you have the serpent. They want to call him Satan. Okay. Here's where some division happens. There's a branch of Christianity called the Gnostics. Now, even in Gnosticism, you have branches of Gnostics. But some Gnostics look to the serpent as the Messiah. Why is that?
I literally just was searching in because I was going to bring that up next, and I literally just searched the Gnostic take because I was going to make sure that I had the right sect in order. I was literally just pulling them up.
In a way, it kind of makes sense because the serpent comes in and frees the mind, plays the Morpheus to Adam and Eve. So it's like, look, agree or disagree. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with one way or another, but there's the same story, and yet two very different opinions are taken from the same story.
Right, because in the Gnostics take, the voice is not the voice of God, it's the voice of the devil, and the serpent is the one leading them to the knowledge, encouraging them to eat, correct?
Yes, but where some Gnostics may disagree is that the serpent wasn't the devil. They would call the serpent, just the. Yeah, they might. Some might. Yeah, some might call him the devil.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the serpent, there's a lot of negativity, but like the winged serpent is is positive in a lot of different ancient cultures.
Sorry. Like
the Aztecs have I've loved some of the artwork on them, especially some of the color palettes they use. I'm gonna again butcher how to say it. The cuckoo clan. But it's the winged serpent in the Aztec culture. But some of the artwork that they've done of that guy is brilliant, so clean looking. But there's a lot of like the winged serpents that are not like dragons we think, but like actual like serpents with wings. Those variants are I think more often than not are not thought of as like evil or malicious.
Okay, that's interesting. I actually didn't know that. And I guess the wings give it more of like an angelic feature rather. And I think also, so the serpent I think is referred to maybe as Lucifer. And I think Lucifer, just even saying that has like negative connotations because of how it's been presented. But yeah, so and look, I can see that point of view. It's it's almost like the way that, and look, no disrespect to any Christian out there, Catholic. I was actually raised and baptized Christian, so my knowledge of Christianity kind of comes from within, and it's something that I worked out of in a way. But the God, as presented in the Bible, is sort of like scared. Like he's almost like a demigod in a way. It's almost like not God itself, because it's like, well, why? Like, why wouldn't you want your children to be as woke as you are? Why wouldn't you want to impart upon them? Why Why would you want them to always be subservient to you? Why would you want them to always have to? It's like, what are you insecure? God, It- you telling me that you're what? Why was that the narrative? Why? I don't know. I don't have the answer. Just asking the question.
Right. Yeah. I like the Gnostic texts, the ones they found in the 80s in Egypt.
Nag Hammadi library.
Yeah, like some of those. Like there's even there's a reference to. I believe they use Yesha, right? Like with the Y, and that's the way they spell
Yeah.
the prophet in that one. Like essentially Jesus. It's always Yesha, I think, in those. But there's a spot where he says like, I can't remember the previous context, but it was like transcend to heaven, or the one above that. And even there's a few wordings where they don't speak about heaven as sort of a singular place, but as like an elevated level, and that there's more than one.
Degrees of awareness, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Degrees of awareness, right? We talk about heaven and hell. It's like, so you're gonna tell me, and look, I could be totally wrong. I could die and go to hell. I have no idea. I'm alive. I haven't, at least to this ego, this KG, I haven't died. So I don't know what death is. Like physical death, maybe some ego death, but like no physical. I haven't physically died. So it's like heaven and hell could exist, sure, but it seems like it probably doesn't to me. Because it's like, okay, you be a good boy or a bad. Well, first of all, you're a bad boy. You can never get away from that. You're 100% a bad boy, and if you're lucky, if you repent, then you can go to heaven. And it's like, so what? Live my life in fear and regret and guilt and anxiety, so that way, while I'm not alive, I can live a good life. Seems like a way to keep people suppressed or like pushed down or really subservient, really. It almost seems like in some ways the Bible was meticulously crafted to be a form of social control. And like you have the Nag Hammadi library, like you were talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls that were written around the same time, the same type of language, and the same type of like literary construction. And yet those, even though they talk about Jesus too, those aren't real. They didn't make the cut. They didn't make the director's cut. They pushed those out of the movie. We didn't like those bloopers. But it's like, dude, is actually one of the books in the Nag Hammadi is the something of the Book of Thomas. Sorry, the book of like that's how the Book of Thomas. And it's one of Jesus's disciples. In the whole book, it's actually one of my favorite ones to read. It is literally quotes. He took quotes of Jesus.
And Yesha said.
Exactly.
And Yesha said
Exactly.
every single one.
Exactly.
No, I've read
Yeah.
it. I've read it. It's fantastic.
Dude, I'm like, okay, so if this really was quotes, it's like Jesus sounds kind of like a hippie, a yogi. Is he a yogi? Kind of sounds like a yogi.
He does. I don't think it's one of Yesha's, or not one of Thomas's. There's another one in there too that I like where did you read the one where one of the disciples is telling Jesus like he's like looking for like an attaboy, where he says like he went into someone's home and like didn't eat something they weren't supposed to eat. Do you remember that part of the story?
I don't.
And again, I'm like I look for context and lenses. I have a very odd sense of the things I remember and pull out. Oh yeah, Crypto in the Hood says the same thing I was talking about. That a lot of those ancient civilizations represent the serpent as knowledge.
Nice. Exactly. Yep. That makes total sense, right? With how the Gnostics see it. Makes total sense.
So in this context, there's one of the disciples is speaking with, they would have used Yesha at the time, or in these contexts, so like he's speaking with Yesha, and he's like Yesha, it was probably like pork or one of those things. Like I didn't eat what I wasn't supposed to at these people's home. And Yesha responds along the lines of like, well, like it's worse to go in someone's home and like not accept their hospitality essentially and be rude to fellow man over the obedience to a rule, which is very different than you would see most religious doctrine spoke. But in that context, he basically says like, kind of like, it's funny, it's well put, but it's a funny version of like, well, I'm glad you followed the rules, but you're kind of being an ass to somebody who brought you into their home and fed you. That's a far bigger crime than like eating pork. And
I love that actually. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, but those are the couple ones. One, I love the one that you brought up with Thomas. I remember reading the take on the serpent, and then that was one of the other ones. The one that there wasn't specific heaven, and that one there, that essentially that there's a bit of a hierarchy to rules, and that following the rules to a stringent T isn't really the understanding. Like, that's not the idea, right? It's about following ideas of righteousness. And like, I even think that this plays out like with like the hate toward like homosexuality, and some of these food choices. Like, how do you convey certain things to a population that doesn't understand, right? Like, if you were Jesus, what would you have told people? Like, you can't explain the science; they don't understand. So like, how do you tell them that like that the creation of children is very, very important to move the species forward? Like, how do you tell them that XYZ thing is a food poisoning? Like, how do I convey some of these things, right? And also, these things change. Like even like racism in the States, right? Well, if you were taking presuppositions about black people during the slavery times, you would have been right. Like, they would have been the lower rung society that got brought over. Okay, well, they take the lower rungs of any society, they're not going to be as educated. Then they were removed from a school system. So like, that is what you would have seen. You would have only seen a handful of people that you could easily identify that were then taken from the lower tiers of their culture, and they weren't educated. Like, that would have made sense, right? It's not until you see the rest of the population, they go to school and they're like, oh, never mind. Turns out they're just people like the rest of us, right?
Right.
But in that context, racism would have actually made sense, because that's what the data would have bore out that you saw, right? And then the world changes. There's education. There's all these things. And I'm not obviously talking about the despicable side, but looking at it from an education standpoint, it would have made more sense, right? And I think the same thing if you look at like that, the sort of backlash toward like homosexuality. Well, if you don't understand these things, and you need people to be able to procreate, you need to be able to give them guidance, and you need them to have children to foster and grow civilization and prosperity. I can only convey so much of these things in so many words to people who aren't educated, who don't understand, and you end up having to like draw some parallels and some stories, or people just don't understand, right? Like, we do that with everything we do now, right? Like, we have to tell people a story. You can't just give them the data.
That's actually a really interesting take, and one that I have not considered. Like, maybe it was they justified the means by the end. Like, maybe God fearing wasn't the as we aggressed as humans, looking back, like, hey, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. But it's like, hey, let's put a little God fearing there, because if they don't procreate, like, our race is gonna die off. They keep eating pork, they're like getting liver disease, or I don't know, whatever the thing was. You're right. It could have been. That's actually a really interesting point.
I actually don't really like Joe Rogan's stand-up. This is my all-time favorite one of his jokes. He's going on a rant, like he's making fun of like gun owners and 2A and all this stuff, and about how like the Constitution's everything. And he has a really interesting joke where he's like, if I think he uses Thomas Jefferson is the one he uses. So if Thomas Jefferson came back right now and heard all you guys talking about the Constitution, do you know what the first thing he would say is? You guys didn't write any new shit. I wrote that with a candle. I used a fucking feather. You guys didn't do anything? It's been 200 years. Y'all are still following that shit? I was drunk. Like, he goes on this huge rant where he's being really hysterical. And again, I actually do think the joke's funny. But I get the point that I'm getting at is, I think that if there's a lot of things that go into like why there was these particular times where like religion sort of sprang upon, and we see these evolutions, right? But I think almost if you take the same circumstances and knowledge, and essentially if you think, okay, Jesus runs this back one more time, I don't think that he would even give us the same commandments in the same context that he would have. Now there's a different level of understanding. There's a different side of population. Like, I would imagine that like he wouldn't be that concerned with like homosexuality, but he might have a much, much higher disposition on things like pollution, right? Like, I just think that, again, you give people what they need, right? And so like, we can't like, you can't give us biology unless you give us the basics, right? Like, you can't give trig until you know how to add and subtract. So I even think that when we look at some of the rules and some of these harshnesses, I do think that they had a lot more impact at the time that would have been more important. But again, I think if you take that same thing, if you sort of take the same religious experience with a prophet, if they showed up right now, they wouldn't give you the same instruction.
Totally agreed. Which is why sticking to Jesus and Jesus alone is an antiquated way to live, because we have prophets all over the place. And who knows if the next Jesus could be walking amongst us already. Could not be. Could be 100 years from now. Could have been 100 years ago. We have prophets of every generation. And you're right. Look, Jesus didn't even write the Bible. People wrote the Bible about Jesus. All Jesus was out there was living his life, leading movements, being a thought leader. Even if he wasn't real, maybe he was. His character. He was educating. He was freeing minds. He was being a Morpheus. Every generation has Morpheus. Maybe they don't get as famous as Jesus. Maybe there's a guy in a community of 100 people, and he's their Jesus. She is their Jesus. Whoever this person is, Jesus is an archetype. It's like the Gnostics, they call it the Christos. All of us can be. Look, none of us probably are going to be like this character that rings throughout time and history and like such a part of the human psyche like Jesus is. That could have just been like the right culmination of elements, but we can all be that character in our own life. And we can all have an impact. We can all be thought leaders. We can all free minds. And Jesus, dude, he was undeniably a revolutionary. He was a Jew at the time. And he was like, what is this Judaism? You guys are perverts, not in that sense of the word, but they were perverting. And man, he was coming up with radical ideas, and they obviously resonated with people. And so here we are still today debating if his message is relevant, real. And I think that, look, I like him as a character. I don't necessarily like Christianity as a religion, but I like him as a character because we see it in the Buddha. He's a Jesus character in a way. I'm sure the Muslims have their own, or Muhammad. They have Muhammad. You have
Well, they have Jesus too. They just don't think he was the son of God. They just think he was a prophet.
beautiful.
He's actually one of the most quoted. He actually might be the second. He's like he's one of the top 3 or 4 most quoted prophets in Islam.
Wow. And see, that makes total sense, because if Jesus was saying, "Hey, the way to God is through me," well, he's not saying like my status is unattainable. He's just saying like, "Hey, I'm setting the path." That's how I interpret that.
There's another one on a slightly like more Newtonian take that's interesting.
Sure.
I don't think people know what they mean when they talked about separation of church and state. Everybody always thinks that they mean like religion. Everybody forgets that's how we separated the states in the first place. We literally separated along religious lines, right? Every single, if you look at any of the like founding fathers, they say God in almost every single document. Like the idea that any one of them weren't Christian is absurd. Like if any one of them would have said they were atheists, they would have been burned. Like that, they would have never been able to hold office. But they said separation of church and state. One of the things you brought it up earlier, like how powerful some of these things are in the text. They weren't talking about God. They literally meant the church. The church was too powerful. They were trying to keep what they had seen with the power of like the Catholic Church and everything, and how much it had an impact on all the oligarchies and all the royalty that they had over in Europe. So like even when we talk about it here in the U.S., sometimes they talk about like they confuse freedom of religion and separation of church and state. It was never about separating religion and God from the governing bodies. They meant literally the church.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, you're right.
That's an interesting framework people don't talk about.
No, that's an important distinction to make, because you're totally right. Churches have been governing bodies in and of themselves. They have been the government, or so right hand with the government that it became political corruption in some way. And so, yeah, you can't take religion out of human. Sure, there's some people that are atheists, and I support and respect those people. There's some people that are very religious, and I support and respect those people. But you can't take that away. We're all going to question where we come from. Oh, no, you can't. If you're going to be president, you can't question where you come from. You came from your mom. That's where you came from. Don't think about it any further. No, I totally agree.
One of the funny ones, I think they said this about Sam Harris, and actually this is kind of similar to me. I'm so unsure about how I would really quantify God, or how I would draw the boxes right. That I think so. JP has this quote where he's like, when you say, "Do you believe in God?" I'm not sure what you mean by believe or what you mean by God. And I really like that take.
It's
and
amazing.
There's another one about Sam. I think it may have been JP talking about Sam Harris. He said that even if Sam Harris says he doesn't believe in God, he still acts as if there is one. And I think that's actually, as funny as it is, I think he was probably trying to tease Sam.
Yeah.
That's actually the way I think I carry myself in general, is that I find a lot of value in most religious texts in some way. Like I find something that I really, really resonate with in almost everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Even like if you try to read like the Vedas, oh my goodness, they're extremely difficult to get through and read in any way, because they're just, the language is so large. Even the translations are so difficult to read through. The names are hard to keep track of. They're so long that they just don't resonate with the Western view. What I really like when it comes to like what I would really say, like believe in God, I really don't even know what I mean by God. I have like some like very loose ideas that I help to use, but I really like follow along with that line of like Sam Harris. Like I'm not really sure even what I mean when I say God, but I'm still gonna act like there is one. Like that idea that there's a moral force of the world, and that there's things greater than myself. That makes sense to me. What it is, or how they're playing, or how the math works, no idea. It's all just guesswork for me. But it makes sense for me to still act as if there's one, even in certain aspects where I don't know that my like religious belief, understanding, knowledge sort of makes sense. I just still, even in those particular frameworks, I still think I pretend, because it just seems to be a better life decision.
I can hear you on that. And I the way you just described it, I think I resonate to a T with that. I don't know what God is. And when I try to define it, it goes into the whole spiel I went on a moment ago. But it's like,
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's that even if you think we're living in a computer simulation, you're admitting there's a programmer. Who's that programmer? And what reality does the programmer live in? And if that programmer is living in a reality in which he or she or it could program this simulation, what created the programmer that programmed this simulation? Did it create itself? If it created itself, how? So there's like, I think like when I think about what is God, it's like that point that all religions are trying to. If you're an atheist, you're saying you don't believe in God. I want to know what you mean when you say that thing you don't believe in. It's a thing that nobody can articulate. That I mean,
Yep.
like that thing.
Yeah. The even the atheist like worldview, like that stuff, it's just so hard. It's just so funny. Like again, you get so large, so out of sight. It's wild. Like so, like I said, you get to some of those points where like you get like the definition. They've made fun of some of those things where like you hear like Jordan, like like I don't know what you mean by the word believe. Like when you're talking about something so difficult, the typical understood agreements on what these words mean, they fall apart now. Like I don't know what you mean by belief. I don't know what you mean by God. I've always like, really like enjoyed that take. And
Go.
There's another funny one. So I'm pretty sure it's Timothy Leary, and he was talking about one of the like really, really heavy LSD experiments they're having. And he said something to this guy that tripped him out. And when I read this, and I instantly got a little bit of like a visceral reaction where I was like, if somebody said this to me, I would lose my damn mind. But I guess he's sitting there speaking with somebody, and they're both just
Blasted
out on the L, blasted off. And the guy, I guess, is like having one of those like ego death moments where he's like, I'm just not sure like what I am or what this all is, kind of thing. And Timothy Leary says, hey, how far can you remember back? Because I can't figure out how I got in here. How'd you get in yours? And he's talking about his body. And I was like, why would you ever ask a human being on LSD that? I don't. How'd you get in yours? Man, I don't know how I would handle that. And I can tell you it's not positively.
It would melt.
Just watch the world melt back. But yeah, I've never forgot that phrase. How'd you get in yours? And I was like, oh no, nope,
Wow.
that's not good. But I always thought that was like, obviously at the time I like read it and like wanted to put the book down and like not look in the mirror. And yeah, it was one of those really interesting ones. But that's another one of those things that get into like even like that soul consciousness side of these things. I think is an interesting take. And again, like, you know, again, like some of those, like the atheist views of things, it's one of those things, like, again, even if it's a simulation of these things, it just seems so much less interesting to think about life in a very like Newtonian set of things, where this is just this finite sliver of the entire complexity of the universe and time. This is all I get to experience. I guess it's one of the things, it just seems like such a boring view. Even if I didn't believe it, I feel like I would try to talk myself out of that. Like the idea that there's more above, more below, more going on, that there's rules and ideas that are like harder to find. It just seems like such a more interesting game to play.
Yeah, if you have it all figured out, why are you playing? All right, cool, go home.
Well, like even the like the game theory on like what to do, right? Like if there's no plus sum, and then like you get down to just like, okay, so it's all just very like shallow pleasure systems. It's like, all right, well then, I mean, I guess I'm just gonna like steal fast cars and do coke until somebody stops me. It just doesn't seem nearly as engaging as this more like holistic view of like trying to accomplish in a moral sense being a male, and to stand in front and do hard things and be responsible and build cool shit and like be plus EV for the world. It just seems like more interesting to me. Like, so I think it's one of those things, and that's where I was getting at too, of like, I'm not sure that I believe in God, but I act as if there is one, or I'm willing to pretend. That's where some of those things were like, do I think there's necessarily like a spiritual component to some of those decisions? Maybe not always, or maybe again, my view of spiritualism or God like doesn't 100% like just fit into that decision. I'm still just going to pretend like there is one, even in those scenarios. It just seems like it's a better game. It's really boring if this is really just like carbon, like just dancing around based on physics. It just seems boring as hell. Wouldn't it be way more cool that there's some kind of eternal puppet master that's not in the box or outside of the box and just doing crazy stuff, trying to figure out how we're going to solve this thing?
And is the box?
Yeah.
No, yes, I hear you. I agree. And it is interesting, and it is more fun, and it's freeing, right? Because if all we're doing here is to just be meat suits, having a meat suit experience, eating food, procreating, pooping, dying, it's like, okay, you can choose to believe that's the extent of our existence. Well, first of all, I would always pose the question, well, did you make yourself? Okay, you didn't. Well, then what
How'd you
did?
get in yours?
Exactly. Perfect. I'm going to use that so much. It's not even funny. How'd you get in yours? Is it a rental shop? I'd like call them up. I'd like to be about, foot and a half taller, maybe, a little bit bigger biceps. If I can change it out, get a WaLLrus set. And then,
Yep.
back to, you were talking about believe, and how there's like this idea that you can't quite put your tongue on. It happens with more than just God itself, right? Like in the Bible, because here we are, there is the story of the Saul of Tarsus, where when he sees Jesus in Jesus's purest form, he goes blind. Well, in a lot of these other religions and philosophies, Jesus and the Son are synonymous terms. Son being like the actual like physical sun, right? The Son of God, Son, Son, Son. It's all this sun going around everywhere. What happens if you look at the sun? Look right at the sun. You're probably going to go blind.
The blind.
So that's truth. We cannot behold truth, pure light in its purest form. So like what I can look like, if the sun's over here, I can like look at the sun like that. So I'm talking about these high level concepts. You can only kind of look at them like that. And it's like, how am I going to convey that over there? So that's why we have stories and analogies and metaphors, because through allegory, we can like point to truth. Like you get what I'm saying when I tell that story, right? Because we can like in our peripherals, we can allude to it, but we can never say truth solved Tarsus. Look at the sun. Maybe we can for a moment, and then it leaves a black spot on your eye.
I always love when like biology or physics like overlays with some of the like the meta side of stuff. So Andrew Huberman, brilliant neuroscientist, one of the things that he recommends is that you try to get as much direct light when you're very early on, and it's like it's one of the behaviors that correlates most with wakefulness. It's literally the light triggering and the photons in your eyes are one of the things that actually trigger wakefulness and consciousness. So the light hitting your eye actually has a direct effect on like your conscious state.
What kind of light? Like just natural light, like sun, like got you.
Yep.
Which makes
has to be natural light.
Which makes total sense. Okay, so Alan Watts says every physical phenomenon has its psychological counterpart. So it's like if we can see it here in this physical world, I can also relate that to the spiritual, psychological, whatever side, the unseen.
And that's another like which kind of came first thing. Like you wonder how many, again, like if you or Yesha or one of these parts, like how do I convey these things to you, right? Like how do I tell you that you need a proper amount of photons to hit the part of your brain that I squeeze through the front of your skull to make sure that you stay awake? All right, well, that's a tough sell. I don't understand. I mean, I understand the words I just used, but I barely understand that level of biology, right? So how do you explain that? Like, okay, the sun god gives you consciousness.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Now I get it. What's his name? Amun-Ra? Yeah, one of the sun god variations. Cool. There you go. Makes sense. Boom. Sun god. Got to make sure I got to make sure that I look at him, do my salutation, some type of yoga, some type of prayer, meditation. Again, it takes a lot of forms. Look at the sun a little bit. Boom. Now your consciousness is greater. So like those things like really, really overlap in really, really interesting ways. There's like sleep is a big one where and this is one of those things that I hope everybody listens to this, and I hope you prioritize your sleep. I say this one, I finally have got a decent regimen the last couple of days. Had a lot of stuff going on and traveling. I've slept terrible, and I'm one that sleep just ruins me. I'm half as good on best. If you think about what sleep does to like an animal in the wild, it loses basically all sensory perception, and it's static for what, depending on the animal, like 4 to 8 hours, maybe longer. Think about how important that would have to be biologically to that animal for that risk to be worth it in the wild. Like you're talking about, you're going to take 20 to 30% of the just time where all these things can be triggered, right? Like we can be attacked by predators, you can be gathering food or shelter, and instead you lay in an absolutely stasis state. How important does that have to be biologically to make that trade-off worth it? Otherwise, why would it not have been like evolutionarily adapted out? So if you sleep for 8 hours, that's 30% of the day. 30% of the day that you are inactive to do mate, food. You're obviously much more susceptible to predators, and yet evolutionary, we've been here for thousands of years and we still sleep. Like it's that important. If you listen to, there's all these like great, obviously great people, but like Habib, he's another fighter. He talks about, he's like, yeah, I don't really get why all these things were with recovery. You just need to sleep more. So like sleep is one of those that people really underestimate how powerful it is. Drinking caffeine too late, blue lights, all that stuff. That's one thing that I would champion people to do is like look at sleep hygiene and just think evolutionary, what it would take to be worth losing 30% of your time to do all those tasks we think of as infinitely important, and then realize why you still sleep.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. Because you're right. That's the perfect way to frame it. You know, we neglect sleep. I mean,
horribly so.
And it's like we're always taking in all these sensory things in all 5 of our senses, and it's like sleep is amazing because it's the yin to that yang. It's anti-sensory. It's so anti-sensory it's over in an instant. You literally don't know. And so, no, I completely agree. And on the note of sleep, I'm gonna round this up because it's 1:30. I got little kids that are gonna wake up way earlier than I need them to for my sleep health. And so I'm gonna go try to get as much Z's as I can. But any parting words on your part?
Just be nice, be grateful. It's a special time in the space. If you're here, again, in sort of the greater area where me and KG and a lot of us spend a lot of our time, like, there's just such an abundance of genius right now. There's smart people, there's cool stuff being built, that there's like the precipice of a lot of great things coming. So, and just in the world too, I just recommend everybody focuses on them and their family, build cool stuff, be nice. It's a special time right now. I'm very, very grateful to be where I am.
Bro, I appreciate you jumping on. I can't believe we're at 2.5 hours right now. That was like when I saw that it was you that pinged me in TG, dude. I'm so happy that we got to have this conversation. You know,
It's fun, man. Very fun.
I appreciate you being open. And I know some of the ideas we're talking about, like I get nervous. I'm probably gonna have a vulnerability hangover after this from all the things I said. I'm gonna think too long and too hard, like, oh man, you shouldn't have said that. But I appreciate you coming out here saying those things, being honest, being open, being authentic. And to everybody out there listening, appreciate everybody who spent the whole time with us. Appreciate you coming with an open mind. Appreciate you commenting. And if I could leave with any parting message, we talked about so many abstract things, but this is all a mental exercise, right? We're in the gym working out those biceps, working out that brain set, and we are just exploring the edges of the human mind. And what I wanted to convey with all this tonight, the reason I even started this stream tonight is I wanted to say, if you're out there living your life and there's something you want to achieve, there's something you want to accomplish, this reality we live in is so vastless, so boundless, that if you can see that vision in your mind, the way by which to achieve that vision exists. I can't tell you how. Maybe I can, but it's for you to figure out for yourself. But the way is there if the will exists. So whatever it is you're doing or whatever it is you want to be doing, just do it. Whatever compels you, do that. Whatever fulfills you, do that. You don't need external validation. You are your own validator. And with that, I'm going to say peace.